Hello everyone, welcome back into another stream of Last Protagonist reacting to a bunch of lore videos. Hope you're doing well. So, in yesterday's stream, we checked out the Psychology of Powerlessness in Elden Ring by Ashura. Then we started to check out Silent Ellipsis' videos about the Grand Unified Theory of Elden Ring, starting off with Runes and Demigods, Part 1, and going with Part 2's Sacred Geometry. So Silent Ellipsis was kind enough to let me know with a comment on the last stream that he does have a part 4 out and it wasn't labeled earlier. So today we'll check out parts 3 and 4 with the Grand Unified Theory of Elden Ring, Duality and the Shadow, and then Cosmology and Vision. So, welcome back in, everybody. We have Waste of Flesh, prod by Killian, Elden Enthusiast. How's it going? Hilko, nice to see you guys again. All right, so I feel like I'm forgetting something, but my dog is also distracting me a little bit. Anyway, let's go ahead and dive on in. We might go a little bit over today because these videos are about 45 minutes each. The second one's closer to an hour, but that's fine. Hey, leave that alone. All right, here we go.
Pop quiz. How many times does the word twin appear in Elden Ring? We have the twin prodigies, Mikola
Oh no, do I have to count them all? It's got to be a decent chunk, to be honest.
and Melania, the twin omens, Morgott and Mohg. R'hllana is a twin who wields both twin swords and a spell called the Twin Moons. There's twinned armor, twin blades, the twin birds, and the twin maiden husks. To answer the question, there are 10 full pages of results if you type twin into one of the game's wikis, and 400 results if you type it into the other. Why? Why is Elden Ring obsessed with twins and dualities? The answer will give us both insight into the dualities we've named, and allow us to find dualities that are hidden in shadows.
It's because as soon as you get one twin, that's all you're going to keep getting, just more and more twins. I actually don't remember the ratio of that, but it is unironically true that if you have a child that has twins, that they are more likely to have twins as well. Twin humanity, it all makes sense.
We will find that duality connects to everything in Elden Ring, and allows us to tie together the most critical parts of the game's lore. So once again, come with me, and let's discuss.
Duality and the Shadow.
As usual, this episode will contain spoilers for Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erdtree. But then, many of the points I'm about to make are hard to arrive at even after playing the entire game, so it's really up to you if you want your lore in advance. If you haven't seen the first 2 episodes of this series, I do recommend watching them in order, but I will review major concepts as they come up. If you are watching this video first, there are a couple things you need to know about this series. I am not going to zoom in on a single topic in this video, but zoom out and discuss the big picture, how we can find and interpret major threads of theme and meaning within the game. Because of that, this video will be dense. I will be dropping major lore insights repeatedly, so feel free to pause occasionally and digest. I could easily have divided this video into a dozen smaller ones, and probably garnered more views that way. But that's not me. I'm the guy who called his series The Grand Unified Theory of Elden Ring, and that's what I plan to deliver. So without further ado...
So yesterday I was worried whether or not he was going to deliver on that promise, so we've got another big promise to start off this video. He did say in his comments to me that the 4th video is the last, so hopefully that will wrap things up. Also, this is a really good frame to stop on. That looks pretty dope. Hey, Little Church Lore, how's it going? Nice to see you again.
It's time to duel.
Oh, it's a play on words. I'm like, that's the wrong form of duel because of R'hllana there.
Here's a question that occurred to
Chapter 1, The Great Divide. Hey, Iman, welcome back in.
me when I first played Elden Ring.
And Robbie, nice to
If
see you too.
Marika is a full-fledged god with the power of the Elden Ring at her disposal, then how did the Carian sorcerers manage to fight her armies to a draw? There's a sense of balance between these two factions, even though the Golden Order is said to dominate the lands between. In order to make sense of this, let's back up and consider a series of related dualities that exist in multiple cultural traditions from around the world, including both Western Hermetic alchemy and Eastern philosophy. On the one side of this set of dualities, we see associations between the moon, feminine energy, the spirit, water, and silver. On the other side, we see the opposing energies of the sun, the masculine, the body, fire, and gold. This set of dualities also aligns with the Chinese concept of yin and yang, or in Japanese, inyo, the characters for which literally mean shade and light.
And yeah, it's literally the same yin yang as you were saying there. So it's not as though this means anything different.
The characters for which literally mean shade and light. Some of these associations are fairly intuitive, such as a connection between the moon and water, since the motion of the moon leads to the rise and fall of the tides. Still, it's fascinating how universal many of these associations are, and Elden Ring has a habit of drawing ideas from multiple different traditions and synthesizing them into its own mythology. When we look at these associations side by side, we can begin to understand that these related dualities are really a single duality, a division of reality into two types of energy, which manifest in different ways, and which recombine to create the world. This is the underlying meaning of the yin-yang symbol, most often associated with Taoism. Seemingly opposing forces within the world are in fact interdependent, and neither can exist without the other. No light without shadow, as they say.
In a way, it's a kind of dualism that leads into monism, if that makes sense. Because, as you're saying, you can't have one without the other, because they make each other distinct and they define each other by what they are not. So it's kind of interesting how two things can become one greater thing within that kind of system of Taoism, essentially.
In Elden Ring, we can see these associations everywhere, but especially in Liurnia of the Lakes. Liurnia is a land completely flooded by water, ruled by a matriarchal faction, the Carian sorcerers, and full of people who revere the moon and are practiced in the art of summoning spirits. This is also the first area where we find albinorics, artificial life forms with silver blood. This land of silver reflection, serving as an equal opposite to the Erd tree's golden light, thematically matches with the metaphysical balance between yin and yang. However, there is something about this duality that doesn't seem to add up, because Marika, God Queen of the Golden Order, is female. How does she represent the yang, the masculine energy of the world? What's more, the game heavily hints to us that she is somehow related to the denizens of the night-worshipping eternal cities, and she may even be the spirit tuner that Hugh is indebted to. Those are all connections to the yin side of the duality, aren't they? This discrepancy leads us back to one of the major revelations from a prior video, that Marika and her husband Radagon are a single person. That is, Marika is both male and female. She is an alchemical rebus, and her status as a unity of opposites.
I really should, at this point, make a bingo card and have Rebus as the free space.
Is directly connected to her status as a god over the lands between. Indeed, as a being of merged male and female qualities, Marika should be able to represent the balance of this duality all on her own. And yet the Golden Order raises up some citizens and concepts for veneration, while denigrating others. The world is fixed in an unbalanced state, because Marika has aspects of herself that she has suppressed and hidden. Through the Erd tree, she is shining light on what she wants us to see, But to find the whole truth, we must also look into the shadow.
Chapter 2, Light
The
and Shadow.
is a recurring image in Elden Ring, but also a foundational concept in psychology, used by both Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung to describe the unconscious aspects of the mind. For Freud, the shadow was largely synonymous with the id, the base animal instincts and desires that we all experience. In order to function in society, however, we need what Freud called the ego, the ability to separate the id from more productive and acceptable thoughts. Finally, Freud conceived of the superego as a set of guiding principles that direct the ego in choosing which thoughts to bring to the surface and which to suppress. In Elden Ring, we see this connection between shadows and the id represented by characters like Blythe and Malekith. They are both called Shadows of the Empyrean, vassals given to Ranni and Marika, who appear as beast-human hybrids. We first encounter Blythe deep in the woods, howling at the moon like a feral creature, but are taught how to interact with him by Kale, by snapping our fingers. This sound summons him down to us, where he speaks with surprising civility and restraint. Despite his bestial nature, he is ultimately a subservient aspect of Ranni, a being that is accustomed to being ordered about and made to suppress his nature.
Is that patch on Blythe's face like skin? Like I've noticed it, but I never really thought about looking into it. Blythe face close up. That's right. I said Blythe with 2 D's and not a TH. Bro, can I not get this in a higher resolution? It just maybe it's more like discolored or something. Oops. Or like blood. But it's like stained on there, so I don't know. Doesn't seem like less fur, perhaps. Anyway.
Marika has a similar relationship with her shadow, Malekith. She ordered Malekith to take the Rune of Death and hide it away in the crumbling city beyond time, Far Missoula. When we encounter Malekith, however, he's in the guise of a cleric, his form covered from head to toe, bound by a duty to recover the lost shards of the Rune of Death that were stolen from him.
Duty.
As we progress his storyline and feed him death, we see his bestial nature emerge, and he attacks us without provocation, needing to be physically suppressed by the player before we can once again speak civilly. We eventually have a similar interaction with Blythe, for despite his loyal and valiant qualities, it was the 2 fingers that played the role of ego to Blythe's id that separated him out and suppressed his violent instincts. Perhaps this is why he responded to our finger snap when we first met him. He was created to be a servant to the fingers.
This is a weird thought, and I don't really buy into it because we have too many counterexamples which don't seem to fit into it super well, but the random thought that just popped into my head right now would be like, what if humans were created out of the beasts through like the fingers splitting things in two, and that's essentially what an Empyrean is, a girl who's had her bestial nature removed from her from the fingers. And you might even be able to argue the same about the demi-humans. So let's say you had a beast man, then the 2 fingers came into play. They split the beast man into 2 to grant him intelligence, I guess. And then you have the demi-human plus like the Empyrean. Now, I don't really think that works because you have a lot of counterexamples to that, like Godfrey or pretty much any dude. Because, well, I guess Mikkel is technically a dude Empyrean. But anyway, you guys get what I mean. Like, it doesn't seem like literally all humans / tarnished, whatever you want to call them, were split down the middle. But it was just... it made me wonder if that could have had any possibility into playing into that multiple aspected nature that Miyazaki hinted about the Empyreans, but even so, I still don't think that works super well with how Mikola has multiple aspects with Trina and Melania with the would-be Scarlet Valkyries. Although it still bothers me to this day that they didn't have Shadowhound beasts that we know of until they show up in Night Rain. I should take suggestions for the Lord Bingo card. Jaraka, for example. So when you say Jaraka, do you just mean a reference to the idea in general, or does the word Jaraka need to come up? And then Platinum Chip, Meow Laser, and Without Horns, welcome back in.
At the end of Rani's questline, however, she slays her pair of fingers that sought to control her fate, and in their absence, there is no ego to control Blythe. Thus, the next time we see him, he has become feral, and his bestial fury is unleashed at us. FromSoft really has a habit of forcing us to put down good boys. So in short, the base game is very Freudian. But the other founder of modern psychology, Carl Jung, had a different perspective on the shadow. The shadow, according to Jung, is the aspect of ourselves that is difficult for us to look at. The aspects of self that contradict how we want to see ourselves. In other words, as we develop a sense of identity, we tend to elevate the inner thoughts and feelings that reinforce this sense of self, while repressing the thoughts and feelings that conflict with it. According to Jung, repression of the shadow is unhealthy, a stopgap in order to get along in society, whereas we should instead aspire to achieve shadow integration, a state of full self-acceptance. It is this Jungian conception of the shadow that we see on display in The Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, for the realm of shadow contains all of the truths that Marika wishes to keep hidden, all of the dark truths that she refuses to acknowledge. When we first arrive,
it's so weird that she wants it to remain hidden, and she also tells her demigod children to become gods if they so wish. It's like,
in this land, we see in the sky great veils draped over the realm, a very literal image to represent this land being covered up. What's more, these veils may look familiar, for they match the draping cloth over Marika's own bed in the golden capital of Leyndell. With this in mind, the DLC can be understood as an exploration of the skeletons in Marika's closet, or if you want to be even more literal, Marika's dirty laundry. We see this relationship to the shadow reinforced in Mesmer, Marika's child, who she hid within the realm of shadow. Mesmer was born with an abyssal serpent inside of him, and Marika suppressed this aspect of her son by replacing his eye with a false one, an eye that sees through the grace of gold. When Mesmer removes this golden seal, the repressed shadow erupts from within him. So we have a sense of what the shadow represents thematically within Elden Ring, but what are light and shadow in a more literal sense? In our world, light reveals things obscured by shadow. It makes them perceivable and knowable. In Elden Ring, I think we can go a step further and say that.
So Pilgrim Butterfly and Asanex and Global Sequence, welcome back in. Pilgrim had asked, is the gate the only way to divinity? It's arguable depending on what one's definition of divinity is. If you say that Millennia can bloom into a scarlet goddess, arguably no. There's also the Godskins who presumably didn't go through the gate. But if your argument for divinity is one who would become a vessel for the Elden Ring, then maybe. But even that much is arguable because it seems as though Rani should become a god in her ending, but she doesn't exactly go through the gate of divinity. She just kind of like poofs Marika away and takes the order with her, I guess.
Light renders things more real than they were before. I claimed in a prior video that the language of creation was visual in the world of Elden Ring, that it was shape and motion. The written version of this language is called a language of light, and we see in various contexts that light forms runes and can bind things and make them real. We see this, for instance, in several catacombs that are filled with enemies made of shadow. these enemies are dangerous, but cannot be harmed until you expose them to a golden light. In our world, light can dispel the creatures of our imagination that lurk in unseen corners by showing us the true shape of the world around us. And in Elden Ring, light forces these ambiguous, half-real aspects of the world to assume a fixed form. If light can be a kind of language, then perhaps it can also serve to name things, to draw a boundary line of identity around what something is and what it isn't. And this is how an amorphous thing comes to be fixed, by having light cast upon it. All light, however, comes from a source, and the nature of that source affects the character of the light itself. So let's consider the most important source of light in our world, and the diminished role it plays in the lands between.
Chapter 3, Pokemon, Sun and Moon.
The sun is one of the most common objects of reverence in our world. Across cultures and time, the sun is a giver of life and warmth. In Elden Ring, however, the sun's role has been usurped by the Erdtree, which is the brightest thing in the sky, both night and day. In fact, the presence of the sun is subtle enough that you can find Reddit threads where players ask whether or not the sun even exists within the game. Nonetheless, we know that in the past, the sun was an object of worship, as noted by items like the Sunrealm Shield. We can assume that before the Erdtree took on this role, the sun was indeed a giver of life and golden light, and the Erdtree's role is derivative of this traditional role of the sun. So what about the moon? You might think that if the sun represents life, then the moon represents death. But that's not quite right. If we think about the innate qualities of the moon, especially as represented in Elden Ring, one theme comes up most clearly: reflection. After all, the moon doesn't generate its own light. It reflects the light of the sun. Moreover, in places where the moon is venerated, such as the moon-gazing grounds in the Carrion Manor, we see pools of water. The moon was viewed by the people who most respected it through its reflection in the water. And this theme of reflection is a wordplay, for the primary metaphysical significance of the moon is as a symbol of memory. Consider that all of the memory stones found in the game are said to be fragments of a moon that once hung above an eternal city, and the Moon of Nokstella talisman similarly increases your memory slots. So, where the light of the sun gives rise to the present and the physical, the reflected light of the moon connects to the past and the world of the mind.
I think these are pretty good observations, and this is part of why I'm reluctant to tie memory specifically to runes and gold in general, because if you do tie it into the moon and the black moon of Nokstella, while they do reflect some of the sun's aspects, and maybe they're arguably gold to some degree, it's a little bit strange trying to reconcile the way that you get silver fireflies in places that are untouched by sunlight and silvery stuff being byproducts of the lack of gold, but still existing nonetheless. So I think there's kind of a duality there that is hard to parse. Lies?
This is where spirits come into play, for Elden Ring makes it abundantly clear that after death, memories remain. We can use a spirit calling bell to summon spirits to aid us as they recall battles past. And the phenomenon of those who live in death demonstrates that death of the body and death of the spirit are separate things. In the age of the Erdtree, the dead are intended to be buried at the tree's roots so that they can be reabsorbed, body and soul, into the Erdtree and reborn. But this is only true of the current era, and is a reality that is already starting to break down when we enter the lands between. Indeed, both Ranni's story and Miquella's story involve them sacrificing their flesh and the fate that was tied to it in order to pursue an alternative, spiritual destiny. we noted that water is associated with the moon, and we can also see that it is closely tied to spirits. As you wander the lands between, just look, and you'll see that disproportionately, spirits manifest around bodies of water. Why are the ancestral followers in the lower part of the Shifer River spirits, while the ones higher up near Necron are physical? Because the ones below are next to the river. The earliest encounters with those who live in death in Limgrave occur in a river and in a flooded ruin. The field bosses that reanimate those who live in death are boatmen called Tibia Mariners. The default, non-hostile spirit we encounter throughout the game is in the shape of a jellyfish. Even our spirit steed, Torrent, has a water-themed name. I want to acknowledge Nameless Singer here, who gives a really solid set of associations between water and death in a recent video. But I'm going to go a step further. I think that water in Elden Ring is a medium for the spirit, and therefore the mind.
I would agree with that assessment there, and I would also turn to Bloodborne in terms of water representing a barrier to the arcane, and the arcane there is kind of like a catch-all phrase that could refer to an extra planar nightmare realm in which like supernatural powers can be accessed. There do seem to be some similarities between the way that the cosmos functions in Bloodborne and Elden Ring to a degree. Granted, it's probably a more robust thing in Bloodborne, but there are some similarities with the way that the oracle bubbles look for prophecies in their bubbles, and the way that astrologers will look for prophecies or fate in the night sky, essentially. And the oracle bubblemen being able to see that within their kind of liquids implies that the cosmos does have some kind of divine connection to water in Elden Ring as well. And then Matar the Great, welcome on into the stream. Global said the Spirit Caller Cave is full of shiny water. Yes, that is true as well. And I wondered if that's why, like, you have the spirit calling snails within there, if there is some kind of overlap between those two things. And of course, there's a good possibility that at least in Liurnia, the water was infused through like glintstone contamination, or maybe glintstone is the byproduct of like cosmically infused water crystallizing. I'm not entirely sure, but it's definitely fun to think about there. Hilko asks, has anyone explored the idea if there were multiple crucibles? Maybe Miyazaki did a cosmological asset reuse of the previous games. So as far as multiple crucibles go, I'm sure some people have thought about it. I don't really have too strong feelings about it. I think it would be easy to help reconcile why the hell Solaria's tree is called a tree shape if it's the crucible, whereas pretty much all the other depictions of the crucible don't seem to align with that. Depiction is too strong of a word. References to the crucible don't seem to align with what we get with Siluria's tree specifically there.
Water is connected to death because it is connected to the immortal spirit, and flowing water in particular can lead spirits to pass on, while stagnant water can leave the dead trapped. This association between water, the past, and the world of the mind has appeared in past FromSoft games as well. For instance, the opening cinematic for Dark Souls 2 features the protagonist approaching ruins by the water, and then within the water, we see a reflection of those ruins as they appeared in the distant past.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of the intro of Dark Souls 2, because the ruins here, but you could see they're not ruins in the water.
In Bloodborne,
Hey,
water is used several times to indicate entering a space within the mind. The role of water in Elden Ring has shifted slightly, but the game is definitely playing off of similar imagery and associations. Reflection and depth are visual as well as linguistic metaphors for the internal world. Notably, living things all have water inside them, including us, and including trees. We can, in fact, see that the Erd tree's roots reach all the way down into the deep-root depths, drinking from an underground river that, much like the river Styx in Greek mythology, seems that it once was used to ferry the departed on from this world. If that's all true, it may be that the Erd Tree harbors memories precisely because it has co-opted the role of the afterlife, just as it has co-opted the role of the sun. All lives and afterlives now must flow through the Erd Tree, trapped in a cycle of rebirth within the lands of between.
And that's long been my position about the Erd Tree, which is why I wasn't uncomfortable with propagating the theory that if the Erd Tree was the primordial crucible to a degree, like in the distant past, then saying that the crucible was the source of all life didn't necessarily contradict our understanding of it coming later in the timeline, if things are being filtered into the Erd Tree through the cycles of life, death, and more specifically, conquest.
In order to understand what the alternative is, we need to better understand the concept of death.
Chapter 4, Destined, Death, and the Eclipse.
There's something paradoxical about death in Elden Ring. In our world, we understand death to be the end of life, but in the lands between, there are also those who live in death. There are spirits who seem to persist long after their bodies have perished. What's more, we are told that the rune of death, or destined death, was removed from the Elden Ring, and yet things still die all the time. So what does the rune of death do exactly? In order to make any sense of this, we have to recognize that there are two fundamentally different things that Elden Ring means by death. There is the end of bodily life, and there is that which comes after, the eternal life of the spirit. We know that in the age of the Erd Tree, these two meanings are merged, because when a person dies, their body and soul are intended to be returned to the Erd Tree. In the age before that, however, death was very different. We get hints about older practices of death from several sources. There are the rivers running under the earth, the Shifra and Ainsel, which carry coffins along a journey to a destination that has since been cut off. There are the Deathrite birds, which supposedly used to burn the dead in ghost flame. And we find in the Shadow Keep burning funeral barges, evocative of a Viking ritual. These images associate death with a combination of fire and water, and all point in a similar direction. Death prior to the Erd Tree was about liberating the soul from the body and allowing it to pass on.
And of course, you might be able to build into that theory with the way that the regal ancestor spirit kind of absorbs the souls of the dead into its antlers in its attacks, and then it becomes more like those animals that it absorbs and reaps like the lives of the deceased that way. I don't know.
But pass on to where? We are given the answer in the opening scene of the game. For we return from death to the lands between by...
How have I never noticed this divine tower here? Is that the isolated one? But this should be Stormvale. Or was this meant to have been the one where you get Rykard's Great Rune, the one next to the fortified manor but doesn't actually go to the isolated divine tower? It's weird. Oh, maybe it's just a weird angle of the one where Moog and Morgoth's fingers were. Sorry for gasping like that. I don't know why that happened that way.
Crossing the sea from the west and arriving at the Chapel of Anticipation along the western coast. For those bound by grace, death goes nowhere. They are reborn into the lands between. But once the rune of death has been unleashed, souls will once again be able to depart in the direction of the setting sun. With this in mind, we have a new way of understanding destined death. Notably in English, the word destiny shares a root with destination. Thus, destined death is not just a death that is the fate of all living things.
What? Because of this? That's not really how you should look at it. Let me back that up.
A new way of understanding destined death. Notably, in English, the word destiny shares a root with destination. Thus, destined death is not just a death that is the fate of all living things, but a death that leads you somewhere else. In turn, perhaps this helps to explain why the game is set in a place called the Lands Between.
I guess that's okay as a comparison. I don't really think it's that big of a deal, to be honest.
Between what? Well, consider that we know of two great runes that were removed from the Elden Ring before the Shattering. The Rune of Death, which was hidden in Far Missoula, and the Rune of the Unborn, which was inside the Amber Egg Radagon gave to Renala. In between birth and death. That is the extent of time one was intended to live in the Lands Between, prior to the rise of the Golden Order and the sealing of destined death. In order to create an eternal order within the Lands Between, these two concepts had to be removed from the Elden Ring. There could be no souls leaving and no new souls arriving. Now we may also be able to understand the opposite of destined death, the eclipse. The eclipse was really hard for me to make sense of, because the sun clearly represents life, and so the sun being an eclipse would mean, well, less life, right? So why does the game tell us that the eclipse, the sun drained of color, is the protective star of soulless demigods, keeping destined death at bay? Notably, the word eclipse in this context may not mean the sun is being specifically occluded by the moon. The relevant part is that it has been somehow drained of color, though that doesn't immediately help us answer the question. I have to give credit here to another creator, The Alchemist, for reminding me of something that can bridge the gap: the myth of the phoenix. You've probably heard of the phoenix. It's a legendary bird that is said to pass away in flames, but then to rise again from the ashes. The thing is, the phoenix originated as part of sun worship, for the sun also dies each day and is reborn the next in a fiery red sky. The point is that the sun can represent both life and death as it moves across the sky and sets, and the red hue of the dusk, leading souls to the west, is the color of destined death. This is the color of the death flame wielded by Malekith and by the Black Knife Assassins, who each infused a fragment of the Rune of Death into their blades.
I don't know. I think the Destined Death color is a lot more vivid in its hue.
Meanwhile, the Godskin Apostles wield a god-killing flame that has no color, and the game tells us that this flame has lost its true power now that death is sealed away. In other words, the flame of the Godskin Apostles is supposed to be the color of dusk, the color of destined death.
I've wondered that myself. I think it's really compelling thoughts, but I can't necessarily guarantee that the black flame wasn't always black, and it may have just had extra superpowers when Destined Death was still in the world.
But it has been drained of color, like the sun in Eclipse. There is another flame.
Because like a common counterpoint to that idea would be, well then why doesn't Black Flame regain some form of color once we release the Rune of Death? And there could be some game-contrived reason for that, but it just kind of sucks that there's no updates for pretty much anything after that point.
That has been similarly drained of color in the current order, Ghost Flame. We see Ghost Flame in the game as a pale white-blue color, but the Grave Violet item says that this flower is the hue of Ghost Flame. If the color of the...
yeah, because of that. So that's unfortunate. That turns out to be more of a thing in the localization. The Japanese just says it's the flower of Ghost Flame, which you can still kind of come to the inference that it should be somewhat representative of Ghostflame, but maybe it got walked back earlier in development. I much rather prefer the idea that Ghostflame was purple in the past, but it's up to interpretation, unfortunately.
The setting sun is the color of destined death. Then it would follow that Ghostflame, which is meant to be used in funerary ritual after death, would be associated with the color of twilight. Twilight isn't a single specific color, but it often appears somewhere in the muted blue-purple range. And given the gray violet description, it seems that Ghostflame used to have a more purple hue. A poetic word for twilight is the gloaming, and thus it's reasonable to assume that the mysterious figure called the Gloam-Eyed Queen once had an eye reminiscent of the hue of twilight. We can also assume that the Deathrite birds were themselves once much more colorful.
Which is true, because in 1.0 they had golden type wings instead of black and blue. No, but yeah, it would have been cool if they were certainly like a more purple color as well.
In any case, if the sun rising and setting is connected metaphysically to birth and death, then we can see the importance of its role being usurped by the Erd Tree. The Erd Tree shines night and day, guiding all souls bound by grace to stay in the lands between eternally. In this context, let's consider the moon once more, alongside a Buddhist concept from the last episode, the Wheel of Samsara.
Are we going to get to
I
Jose?
mentioned that the Wheel of Samsara represents the eternal cycle of rebirth that a Buddhist seeks to free themselves from. What I didn't mention, because I am sneaky, is that traditional depictions of this wheel also include the Buddha pointing toward the moon to
I'll shut up.
represent an alternative to earthly reincarnation. This is likely one of the inspirations for Rani's ending to the game. She seeks to break the cycle and find an alternative to the perpetual suffering of the Golden Order by going on a journey led by the Dark Moon. The phrase Dark Moon is synonymous with the New Moon, which represents the end of one cycle and the start of something else. Dark Moon sounds way cooler, though. So following this trail of dualities has led...
What was I going to say? I was just going to go on a spiel about how the moon represents enlightenment and it represents the goal of the path that one should follow to attain enlightenment, and that oftentimes people get confused or fixated on the Buddha pointing to the moon rather than the actual moon itself. So that's another way of saying, like, following the path to enlightenment for the sake of following the path rather than understanding why there's the path to enlightenment to begin with, if that tracks for you guys.
us to better understand the meaning of destined death and the sun and moon. But what exactly is in the west? Where do you end up
Sun Wukong.
if you actually cross the sea?
The Journey. Chapter 5, The Undying Lands. Acer Aesthetics, who made the videos? Which one exactly? I mean, the Buddha pointing to the moon, that's just been a thing for hundreds of years.
When I started
Elda says, the west is where the sun sets, the underworld. So the concept of the underworld kind of depends on the geographic region one is in. If one is near a coast, the otherworld is typically represented as being across the ocean. If one lives in a mountainous area, the otherworld can be depicted as being above the mountains or even like deep in the caves of like valleys and stuff. It just kind of depends.
the DLC, I couldn't decide exactly what the Realm of Shadow was. Was it a pocket of reality where America hid her secrets? Maybe a distant land connected to the origins of life? Could it be the realm of the dead? Now that I've finished the DLC and had time to consider, I think the answer is all of the above. In order to get there, I have to bring up J.R.R. Tolkien. Claiming that a fantasy story is inspired by Tolkien isn't exactly a revelation, but some of the connections between Elden Ring and the Silmarillion are just too extensive for us to ignore.
Uh-oh, I feel my frenzy meter building up right now. Maybe one day, eventually, probably not likely, I'll get to the Silmarillion. Although, to be fair, like, I wasn't the biggest fan of the Lord of the Rings trilogy in the books. My favorite was The Hobbit, believe it or not. Although of the trilogy, I did like the third the best, just mostly because of the depiction of Mordor. Hey, Chadwick, nice to see you again. By the way, Chadwick, spoilers.
Quick overview of relevant Tolkien lore. In an ancient age, long before the events of Lord of the Rings, angelic beings called the Valar established their home in a land far to the west of Middle-earth, the Undying Lands. They created two magical radiant trees, one gold and one silver, which illuminated the entire land and produced magical dew made of light. The trees were eventually drained of their light and destroyed by Morgoth, the Betrayer, and the shadowy spirit Ungoliant. But the remnants of these trees were fashioned into the sun and moon, and seeds from Telperion, the silver tree, were taken to Numenor, and later brought by the Númenóreans to Middle-earth, where one of these seeds grew into the white tree of Gondor. So, does any of that sound familiar? Recall that America is said to be from a race of unusually long-lived people that come from outside the lands between, called the Numen. When the game came out, much less when I was a kid, you had to be a pretty intense Tolkien nerd to know what a Númenórean was. But now that Rings of Power has been released, I suspect that more people will be able to understand how Numen could be an homage to Tolkien. With this in mind, consider the seed talismans found at Finger Ruins. The seed talismans say that they harken back to the birth of the Erd Tree, implying that Marika received seeds, whether literal or metaphorical, in what is now the Land of Shadow, and brought those seeds across the sea to the land between, to plant in the center of a city that was to be her capital, to grow a radiant tree that was the...
But they were all of them deceived, for another tree was made. Silent Ellipsis, 2025. So about that concept of the Land of Shadow being across the sea, it's arguable. We're told that the calming pillar, whatever it is in English, is the center of the lands between at some point. So whether or not that means like the center between like Stormvale, Caelid, and Altus Plateau, or somewhere else on the map that we don't have access to, is arguable. So with there being one location called the Scadu Altus, it seems as though that there should have been some connection between the lands, but it may have just been renamed later on in honor of the actual Altus Plateau. So that part is a little bit arguable at the very least. And then, hey, Moth Crab, nice to see you again. And Chungus Toad, welcome back in.
Symbol of her divine authority. The parallel is just too spot on. Except, of course, for the fact that Marika is playing the role of Númenórean and the role of Morgoth in this analogy. But we can't all be perfect. So I was tempted to leave that joke intact, but actually, the fact that Marika is serving two contradictory roles in this analogy fits with her role as a union of opposites in Elden Ring. Duality is the theme of this episode, after all. In any case, what does this suggest about the Realm of Shadow? Well, the Valar are nowhere to be found, but I do believe that this is a land that has long existed to the west of the lands between, and was somehow connected to the afterlife. How can we know that? Well, aside from all of the grave and spirit imagery covering every inch of the DLC,
I don't know why, but his delivery of grave and spirit right there just reminded me of Roderica saying, Craven.
There is a smoking gun, namely, the suppressing pillar. No NPCs or other items direct you toward this tower, but if you reach the top of it, there is a plaque, which reads, "The very center of the lands between. All manners of death wash up here, only to be suppressed." This is about as overt as Elden Ring could possibly be about the identity of the Realm of Shadow, but there are a couple of things to dissect about these words. Firstly, this plaque isn't in the Lands Between, so what does that first half mean? Presumably, it means that this spot is metaphysically connected, or perhaps was once even physically connected, to the center of the Lands Between. Okay, so then what's in the very center of the Lands Between? That's debatable, but I think there are really just two candidates. The center of the Lands Between is either the middle of this giant lake, where there is a suspicious cloud on the map covering something up, or it's the Erd Tree. We know that underneath the Erd Tree there are the Deeproot Depths, which are connected to rivers that transport coffins. So whether it's pointing there or to the center of the lake, the answer is that it's pointing to water. This leads to the second half of the plaque.
So one thought that I have about that, I should probably pull up the maps. Map. Hold on, let's do it this way if I can. Ref. Why? Oh, just lagging. Okay, that's cool. Super lag. Hold on here. Wait, why does it say 3D objects right now? That's so weird. Okay. So this is a map of the Lands Between. Now this is a map of the Lands Between on drugs. The Land of Shadow is drugs, kids. So if you were to say that the Erd Tree is the center of the Lands Between, that would essentially force us to put this suppressing pillar. I'm going to put it like next to the throne room, but it doesn't really matter. So like here. And that's about what you'd get, which might be fine. We could say that the shattering shifted the lands multiple times, but it's very arguable what all that would mean. And of course, we could potentially like rotate this to fit things a little bit better if we wanted. Like this isn't too bad, to be honest. But we also don't know if this is to scale or if it should be bigger, etc. like that. But just saying that the center of the Lands Between is the Erd Tree is interesting. And I wonder how well that would work with his own theory that he brought up in the previous video, that the Crucible was the Great Tree, if he thinks of the... whether or not the Erd Tree came from that, or if it's a completely different tree entirely. For what it's worth, he did put on the screen a moment ago, but for all of them were deceived, another tree had been made. So maybe... he doesn't think they need to connect that way, but if you guys think that the Erd Tree came from that tree and they are like literally physically connected, or like that the Shadow Tree is like an inverted Erd Tree, then that might not work with your own headcanon. That was worth bringing up. Is this map to scale? Nope. Chadwick, you're going to have to suck it up and learn things. Get wrecked. Land of Shadow implies Land of Sonic. Land of Sonic implies Land of Wendy's. Hey, True Connoisseur, nice to see you again. You let everyone cook, but you think the fact that the game code put the Shadowland coordinates right below that cloud on the map is telling?
All manners of death wash up here, only to be suppressed. The phrase, wash up, is suggesting that passage to this realm is meant to be through the water. Somehow, waters near the center of the Lands Between were supposed to connect the dead to this land. Now, look at the cerulean coast of the Realm of Shadow. There are massive coffins, the size of seafaring barges, washed up on the shore. We are told that these coffins contain the remains of dead who could not find rest. What I take from this is that after the traditional passageway to the land was cut off, some became desperate to reach the afterlife and decided to cross the sea the hard way. Even upon reaching this place, the dead within these coffins are tainted somehow, and still do not know proper rest, which is why they appreciate Saint Trina, whose nectar can grant them sleep, a rest that is akin to a proper death. All manners of death wash up here indeed. Identifying the realm of shadow as a realm of death also allows us to tie together multiple concepts in the lore. Removing Destined death from the Elden Ring, eclipsing the sun, and casting a veil of shadow over the lands of the DLC were all a single action. The realm of shadow is now unreachable because Destined death led people here. The sun is distant and pale in the sky because
As far as tying that all to the eclipse, I'm honestly not too upset with that theory because that could help explain what Mikola is trying to do with the eclipse in Castle Sol if you wanted to get to the Shadow Realm. And it just really sucks that we don't really have any tangible, concrete information that explains Mikola's change of mind other than ADHD, lol. I don't know.
it can no longer redden
He's
and
a kid.
invoke its metaphysical purpose.
Can't mature
absent
anything.
The rune of death. The reason Ghost Flame doesn't work correctly, and spirits are still trapped in ashes after being burned, is because Ghost Flame drew its power from Destined death. This connection does a lot of conceptual work for us. So you...
I don't know about that. I don't necessarily think he's absolutely wrong with this. I think this just might be a little bit of a shift in perspective here. So, does Ghost Flame draw its power from Destined Death? Maybe, maybe not. Or is Ghost Flame better able to function because of Destined Death? That's a terrible way to phrase it. Let me try to rephrase this. Does the removal of Destined Death impede Ghost Flame's function? Maybe. So, for all we know, Ghost Flame does still seem to work because we have the denizens of the Fallen Hawks becoming like part ingrained into the Ghost Flame down there. But with Destined Death being removed, it may have made the spirits too immortal for the Ghost Flame to get rid of everything. And so the cinders that are left behind may be more powerful than they otherwise would be if Destined Death still existed in the Elden Ring, I guess. So basically, with Destined Death gone, how can you kill something which can't die? You can't. So I don't necessarily think Ghost Flame needed to have drawn its powers from Destined Death entirely, but there's probably some overlap between what would have happened to something that was burned in Ghost Flame when Destined Death was still around. Maybe potentially like Black Flame. The way he tied it all together is tempting, but the devil's in the details. It always is. Daggone devil.
You may be wondering, if the Realm of Shadow is Elden Ring's version of the Undying Lands, in Afterlife for spirits, then why are there living things here too? Well, clearly there are, or at least were, ways to travel between these two lands. The giant coffin barges prove that it's possible, if difficult, to physically cross the sea, and dragons can presumably fly between these two places. But there may have been some kind of ritual way to travel to this land as well, for we get here by following Mikola. I won't go into detail about this ritual right now, because I'm at risk of getting very far off topic. But the point is, one way or another, people were able to seek out this land of spirits. We see this in Devonia, a Crucible Knight, who set out on a quest from the lands between to find the origins of the Crucible. Perhaps the Hornsent and the people of Ra similarly traveled to this land full of spiritual energy and chose to stay. After all, the energy of the Crucible was stronger here, and the boundary line between amorphous spirits and solid flesh was thinner. Speaking of which, there's one last item I want to draw your attention to: the larval tier. Not the one from the base game, but the special variant that can only be found in the realm of shadow, and only at night, in the midst of a circle of spirit graves. This item says that it's an exceptionally rare creature that burgeons from spirit graves, and that it's neither flesh nor spirit, but something in between. Somehow, the boundary lines between body and spirit, between life and death, are fuzzier in this land. Perhaps this is why the shamans, America's own people, lived here and communed with spirits. This could even be connected to the reason why their own flesh was so mutable, so capable of merging with the flesh of others. Transformation is clearly part of the domain of the spiral-shaped crucible, and despite their lack of horns, the shamans seemed to be more deeply connected to this energy than anyone else. And this brings us full circle, for the central role of duality in Elden Ring isn't to emphasize difference, but to show the connection between things that appear to be opposites. Thus, Morgott, born a reviled omen, is actually a descendant of the Golden Lineage, and wields the very anchor rune of the Great Elden Ring. Thus, Radagon, a heroic slayer of giants, also bears their distinctive red hair. Consider Miquella and Malenia. We might say that Malenia's rot is connected to stagnation and decay, whereas Miquella is connected to abundance and growth. On the other hand, we could note that Malenia's scarlet rot seems to grow and spread out of control, while Miquella was trapped in the body of a child, never to grow up.
Yeah, the way that I often describe Miquella and Malenia is that Malenia kind of almost represents cancerous growth because there is no concept of death to stop it from growing, essentially. And then Miquella represents endless youth. And those are essentially similar concepts because to be forever young, at least in real life, would mean to have a constant regeneration of your cells and whatnot. But Miquella, in some ways, might represent a better example of stagnation because he cannot grow up, whereas Malenia is in constant replenishment in a way, to the point that herself is being eroded by this kind of disastrous affliction. That's why she needs to hang so hard onto herself and her will and whatnot. So, Robbie, thanks for joining us. As always, you have a good night.
So which one is stagnant, and which one represents growth? The two concepts are inextricably entwined, or even twinned. Just as the iconic depiction of yin and yang.
And yeah, Malenia might also be like Miquella in that she's supposed to have been like perpetually young, but she could have just been somewhat naturally aged as a byproduct of the rot, kind of constantly cycling her cells in and out with the rot fungi, I guess. So perhaps the reason why the scarlet rot came to bloom within her is because she's a perfect vessel in that she can't be depleted for all we know. But, you know, that's pretty heavy speculation there. Elden, you think Miquella is immutable and his unalloyed gold possesses those properties as well? I do think that the immutability of Miquella and Malenia are the tenets of Golden Order fundamentalism, which is partially why I tend to be Golden Order is a late addition to the Elden Ring / World Order of the game.
Shows that light is always paired with darkness. Everything contains an aspect of its opposite. The world was created by division, and those divisions are reinforced by labels and identities. But identity is a double-edged sword. For every aspect of yourself that you elevate and shine light upon buries another equally true part of yourself within shadow.
Postlude. All right, so before he gets there, I want to say how much I am not a fan of how light and shadow are often depicted as dual, because I think in order for there to be shadow to begin with, you need an object for the light to hit to cast that shadow. So to me, I would say like light and shadow cannot be dual, despite their seemingly dual nature. But of course, that's kind of neither here nor there.
Happy New Year, everyone. I'm happy with how this episode turned out, but this was a challenging episode to write, due to the sheer number of different connections I could have brought up. If I went too far in any direction, however, I found the script running away from me, and I wanted to stay focused on the things that seemed most important. So, needless to say, there are plenty of interesting thoughts I ended up having to cut. I realized that shorts don't really suit my verbose style very well, so I am contemplating trying out medium-sized videos between major episodes. I might label such videos between meanings as a nod to the law of causality, so keep an eye out for that and let me know if it sounds like a good idea. I also wanted to make a note about the various religious and philosophical concepts I keep making reference to. I bring up these concepts as tools to help us interpret Elden Ring, but I don't want to be misunderstood as promoting any particular religious or philosophical attitude. For example, I bring up the traditional divide between masculine and feminine energies in the context of yin and yang, but this concept has been used problematically in the past, to suggest that men contain a positive energy that gets drained out of them by contact with women, for example. That's not the only way to read yin and yang, of course, but it's a real one that some people have stood by. This is the danger of taking any single concept and committing to it without putting it into the context of, everything else in the universe. So please, take such references as food for thought rather than as dogma.
And there's some other weird things to build up with the whole yin and yang dichotomy, which may not work super well with Elden Ring or even like Bloodborne to a certain extent. Maybe it's fine with Bloodborne, but anyway, going back to the concept of shadows as they relate to the shadow men with Blythe and Malekith and whatnot. From what I remember of yin and yang, and I might have the two confused, so if anybody wants to fact check me, by all means, feel free to do so. I always forget which is which. I think yin is the dark one and yang is the sunny one. I'm pretty sure because anyway, yin is dark, but it's also the more rational side of things. And so it's a little bit strange to me that the beasts, if they are supposed to be related to that concept of yin and darkness and shadows, would represent intelligence, but maybe you could tie that into like how the fingers granted beast intelligence. It might be fine with Elden Ring. And yang is more associated with light and earthly type base desires, so essentially the id for a Freudian / Jungian reference. Oh, that's less a Jung, that's just more purely Freud, isn't it? Elda said yin is passive, dark, and feminine. Okay, yeah.
As usual, I want to thank all of you for being so engaged and encouraging, and it really makes a difference to me when I see people notice little details or respond to ideas that I only implied and didn't have time to delve into fully. I appreciate all of you, and as usual, you can show your appreciation for me by liking, subscribing, and leaving comments that tell the algorithm that this is some engaging content. There is, of course, more to come. So until next time.
All right there. So I enjoyed that video. I'm going to go ahead and link it to you guys in the chat if you want to give Silent Ellipsis some support. And then next we'll be going into his hopefully magnum opus, the part 4 conclusion of his grand unified theory, aka Guts, aka Elden Ring is Berserk confirmed.
What does it mean to see something? This might sound like a very abstract question, but in the context of Elden Ring, asking it will lead us on a path toward the most elusive, eldritch entities in the game, and ultimately to some of the deepest truths about Elden Ring's story.
You can see it then, I take it. The guidance of grace.
Tender Miquella's eye is no mere morsel of flesh.
This light once shone in the eyes of your tarnished brethren.
The distant light is far and frail, but with everyone's eyes together, it appears.
So I ask, are we passively taking in the world around us? Or are we engaged in a dialogue with reality simply by opening our eyes?
Alright guys, Elden Ring is Schrodinger's game confirmed.
The core concepts in this video
this is a little bit louder.
inspired
I'm
this
gonna turn it down.
entire series and will completely reframe how you see the story of Elden Ring. So, come with me one more time and let's discuss.
Cosmology and vision.
So admittedly, that was a bit dramatized, but I am quite serious about this video being the payoff for many of the concepts I've discussed so far in this series. By the end of this episode, you can tell me whether or not I have presented something worthy of being called a grand unified theory. In case it's not clear from the title, this means extensive spoilers for Elden Ring, but I will try to minimize spoilers for any other media I bring up in the course of the discussion. If you're new to this series, then welcome. I will absolutely encourage you to go back and watch the prior 3 episodes of the Grand Unified Theory at some point, but for now, let me summarize the core concepts you need to know. First, we discussed the nature of runes, and posited that they are part of a visual, world-making language, spoken fluently by the 2 fingers. These fingers are literally agents of the greater will, and, meta-narratively, represent the actual creative team behind the game, which crafted the world of Elden Ring through the complex motions of their fingers. Next, we discussed the importance of visual symbology, which has an additional layer of meaning in a world where shape and motion are the language of creation. These shapes correspond, among other things, to the concepts of causality and regression, the process by which things divide and recombine as they experience the pull between meanings. Finally, we discussed how this process of division and recombination is expressed in the recurring theme of duality throughout the game. Things that appear to be opposites are, in fact, intrinsically linked to each other, and the ultimate expression of this is Marika herself, a being.
Oh yeah, I was a little bit surprised in his duality video that he didn't have any reference to the spiral, because he did obviously bring that up in part 2, but I think that could have made part 3 a little bit stronger, talking about how the pull between things, rectifying them together so that way they remain balanced and continue forward. Also works with the whole duality because, it's a dual helix, essentially.
Both male and female, a rebus, whose ascension to godhood
Bingo!
is directly connected to her role as a union of opposites. So, with all of that in mind, let's begin by tackling the most mysterious entities of Elden Ring's lore, the Outer Gods.
Inner god, outer god.
At the outset of our journey into the Lands Between, we are introduced to 2 divine entities, Queen Marika, frequently referred to as the god of this world, and the Greater Will, an unknowable, distant being that is credited for both blessings and punishments upon the land. Together, they form the foundation of the orthodox religion of the Lands Between. However, when we enter the Lands Between, this divine order is already breaking down, and through the cracks in the foundation, we can see something else starting to seep into the world, the influence of other divine forces, commonly referred to as the Outer Gods.
Actually, thinking about my tangent about Ghost Flame earlier, The fact that it does use the centipede sigil could imply that it does have more of a direct connection to Destined Death after all. Just kind of sucks that we have such little knowledge of the before times, essentially. Between like the before times of the shattering and even the before times of the sealing / removal of Destined Death.
Little can be said with certainty about these mysterious entities. They don't exist as physical beings in the world of Elden Ring, but as invisible forces influencing the lands between through their chosen representatives. We have the Formless Mother, whose domain is flowing blood, worshipped by Moog. We have the Fell God, source of the flame of ruin, guarded by the fire giants. There are unnamed outer gods of rot and of death, and there are even more enigmatic entities, such as the Frenzied Flame, which is never explicitly called an outer god, but rules over the domain of madness. These beings are by their very nature unknowable. Aside from promoting their domain, be it death, madness, or rot, we cannot know their intentions, or even if they have further intentions. For this reason, they are commonly perceived through the lens of cosmic horror, as eldritch beings whose minds and natures are so alien that we cannot truly fathom them, much like the Great Ones of Bloodborne. They are not malicious, but uncaring, a trait that lends itself to the quiet dread of cosmic horror.
I don't know about you guys, but having the Winter Lanterns, is that what they're called in Elden Ring? Having those guys appear again in a way which is so welcome in the Land of Shadow. I absolutely love that kind of a design, which is partially why I'm pretty excited for the Dreadbloods. Wait, Dreadbloods? Duskbloods. Because it seems like we might have a little bit more cosmic horror-y type stuff with the moon. Oh yeah, I totally forgot to mention. For those of you who aren't keeping up super closely with the Duskblood news, Miyazaki did have an interview released with the Nintendo, not Treehouse. He had some interview released today, so we did get some more details about Duskblood in that this game is going to have seemingly more of a multiplayer focus. It sounds like it's going to be more along the veins of Night Rain, but Miyazaki did say that they aren't going to start like exclusively focusing more on multiplayer games, and they still do intend to release more single player games in the vein of Elden Ring in the future. That's kind of like the biggest takeaway from that interview. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else that was super significant. I don't think there's anything in the interview, but I had the thought then that, wait a second, if this is coming from a Nintendo console and is being produced by Nintendo in part, then does that mean we're going to get some Duskblood amiibos? I'm pretty excited about that, maybe. Dreadbloods would be a cool name. It would, yeah.
Through this lens, we can eventually come to see the greater will itself as an eldritch being that seeks simply to impose order, with no care as to the shape of that order, or the impact that order will have on the people of the world. This is clearly a perspective we are intended to take on the outer gods. But there is a wrinkle that grows more and more noticeable.
That was really good footage of the Death Knight there.
The world. This is clearly a perspective we are intended to take on the outer gods. But there is a wrinkle that grows more and more noticeable as we explore the Shadow Realm of Elden Ring's DLC. For we find ancient forges that remind us that the flame of the Fell God is associated not only with destruction, but with the art of smithing. We can encounter...
And I was thinking about this in the last video when he was panning around the Miko village, that the America Hammer was said to have been like crafted in the lands of the Newman. And it's kind of interesting because we don't really have like a forge in the Miko village. I'm like, well, what kind of other ties to blacksmithing do the Miko have other than just kind of being in the realm of shadow and having like the Smith script folk? But that seems to have been a lost technology, so they're probably a little bit different. But anyway, just some random thoughts that passed through my head.
Friendly.
It's as lost as the god of smithing in Dark Souls? Yeah, apparently.
Members of the Forager Brood, connected to the god of rot, and they give us recipes for fermenting items to improve their protective qualities, a kind of beneficial rot. We increasingly find hints that ancient cultures had different, even positive relationships with some of these beings. So why are their modern incarnations so reliably destructive? To answer that, let's consider their title, Outer Gods. The name is translated pretty literally from the Japanese, Sotonaru Kami, but there is cultural significance to the character Soto and its counterpoint, Uchi, which can help to inform our understanding here. Uchi literally means home, and you can see that the kanji is sort of like a person inside of a structure. Anyway, the dichotomy that the kanji...
Yeah, so this character right here in the midst of the character itself does mean person. And in a more crude example, he's saying like the roof or structure would be this bracket looking like thing.
is sort of like a person inside of a structure. Anyway, the dichotomy of Uchi and Soto is vitally important in Japanese culture, and you can see it, for example, in the entryways to Japanese homes, which always set aside space at the threshold of the home for a ritualistic entry, where you remove your shoes and typically announce yourself, even when space is at a premium in Japan. Maintaining the cleanliness of the inside space is an important part of distinguishing it from the outside, as is observing ritual when entering and leaving. This creates a sort of sacred space in the home. And the Uchi-Soto distinction extends beyond the literal home to social interactions and hierarchies. Here, the divide is between in-groups and out-groups. Beginning students of Japanese are frequently surprised to learn that there are multiple ways to say the same thing, depending on the level of formality that is appropriate. And this formality is determined by the Uchi-Soto distinction. You will use not only different words, but a totally different grammar when speaking to your boss or teacher than you would use with your friends.
And to be fair, we do kind of have similar ways that kind of gets expressed in English, although it's obviously not nearly as formal or so strict. Like, if you walk into work and you just see your boss, unless you're something like a mechanic, you're not just going to be like, sup. There's degrees to formality in English, but it's definitely more rigid with the Japanese there. But yeah, him drawing a distinction between the Soto and Uchi categories there is pretty important, because you do have kind of varying degrees of in-groups and out-groups and levels of formality and casualness, which corresponds to each one. And in some ways, I think if you have like a military background or some experience with the military in general, it's kind of analogous to how Japanese culture operates almost at a base level, because you're typically not going to refer to other people by like their first names or by nicknames. It's a bit more formal, so that's why you have like the last name thing. But if you kind of just like have that as like your base expectation for how to treat others, the culture doesn't seem as different as you might expect, perhaps. I mean, there are big differences, but anyway.
And it gets a lot more complicated than that, but the point is that in Japanese, Sotonaru Kami can be read to imply that these are outer gods in the sense that they are outside of the current order of the world. We discussed the role of the circle in my episode on sacred geometry, and here once again, the importance of a ring as a shape that divides between those who are inside the bounds of the Golden Order and those outside of it reoccurs within the context of gods themselves.
And on this point, I'll reiterate what I said yesterday, that I think the Golden Order did something kind of clever in that they not formalized, what's the word? Institutionalized having both an inner order and an outer order kind of being part of order, which sounds a little bit oxymoronic, because to pull up our handy dandy paint program, let's do it this way. Whoops. So we could say inner, outer. You would almost assume that order is here, but nope, it's a trick example here. Whoops. Get out of here, guy. I don't want that speck there. It's a trick example because it's all order, baby. This is the brilliance of the Golden Order. So hopefully that makes sense. Oh, maybe I should have made that bigger for you guys. There we go. So inner order on the left, outer order on the right. Maybe they correspond to the hands, maybe they don't. All kind of becoming a greater order than they are individually. Hey Stella, nice to see you again.
This also reinforces the significance of the ring shape to Miquella's concept of unalloyed gold, which I also discussed there. So, how do outer gods exert influence on the world if they are outside of the current order? Well, indirectly, it turns out. For in order to enter the world, they must enter a person. And to do that, they must first be seen.
But Millennia is blind? To see or not to
Eyes
see?
are among the most frequently recurring symbols throughout Elden Ring, as is blindness. There's a clear pattern of important characters having one eye shut, including Ranni, Melina, and Mohg, while other characters appear to be fully blind, including Hyetta and Melania. Even Marika herself is consistently depicted in a way that makes it impossible to see her eyes. To decipher this visual theme, let us think back to the beginning of the game. The main character, along with the other tarnished warriors, begins the game exiled, and to add insult to injury, dead. Then the Light of Grace appears, and reanimates each of the tarnished, calling them to return to the lands between. As was noted by a commenter on another recent video of mine, the first item you receive in the game, Memory of Grace, has the appearance of sunlight reflecting on the water, reinforcing that it is the light itself that calls you across the sea to the lands between. After you arrive, multiple characters will ask you if you still see the Light of Grace, an apparent sign of divine favor. In fact, you can see this connection between Marika's favor and the Light of Grace within a person's eye as you play the game, as noted by Zulia the Witch. This Light of Grace appears visibly within the eyes of characters who are accepted within the bounds of the Golden Order, and can even be found in the eye sockets of skulls scattered about the lands between, but not in the eyes of Tarnished, which
It's also in plants, which have no eyes.
explains how many NPCs are able to identify you as such simply by looking at you. We can also
They can even tell when you have a blindfold on.
look to the Golden Rune items for this connection between grace and vision, as more advanced versions of the item gradually come to look more and more like an eye. Now consider that the Erd Tree is the brightest source of light in the lands between. As I've noted before, it has eclipsed the role of the sun, and possibly even contains the sun's light. The light of the sun is the source of all life in our world, and is the light that guides you back from death in Elden Ring. What this all shows is that a significant part of Marika's means of maintaining orthodoxy is controlling light. That is, controlling what you can see. We see this reinforced in the DLC, for the brilliance of Queen Marika's grace blinds even the very best. The Eye of Grace and the Eye of Occultation explicitly describe Marika's clergy controlling the faithful by controlling their vision, and we see this play out directly in Messmer's story, where Marika replaced her own son's eye with one that sees the light of grace, as a way to seal away a dark thing within him. So with all that in mind, how do we read the theme of blindness in Elden Ring? It's tempting to consider it a symbol of blind faith, especially since the starting faith-based class comes with a blindfold. But after everything we've just said, it starts to seem like the exact opposite. If Marika's grace enters through the eye, then closing your eyes is a way to challenge orthodoxy and see the world in some other way. Now consider again that blindfold you start the game with. This faith-based starting class is called the Prophet, and their equipment makes it clear that they were being punished for prophesying the end of the Golden Order. This is the clothing of exiled prophets who foresaw that their faith would end in flames. By the end of the game, we learn that this prophecy was true. Indeed, there is a trope in both Eastern and Western culture of blindness coinciding with the gift of some other kind of sight. In ancient Greece, we have Tiresias, the blind prophet of Thebes, who has a central role in stories like Oedipus Rex and Antigone. In Japan, there is the traditional role of the Itako, a role exclusive to blind women, who are said to be able to commune with spirits. As Mirko observes in a detailed article on translation notes for the game, Itako is a possible reading of the characters used to describe America's own people, the people we've been calling simply shamans. These shamans are exclusively women, can attune to spirits, and their eyes are never shown. The other character connected to spirit tuning is Roderica, and while she isn't blind, her cloak explicitly says that she never once saw the guidance of grace. So, when one cannot see the light of grace, they gain the ability to see something else. With this in mind, the plethora of characters who are partially or fully blind makes much more sense, for each of them is able to see an alternate way that the world could be, or a different kind of divinity that is hidden from the world by the light of the Erd Tree.
Oh, he might get into it right here. All right.
Ronnie can see her dark moon. Both Mesmer and Melina were said to bear visions of fire, and Moog has an eye that has been pierced by an overgrown horn. The last thing it ever saw was blood. This also helps us to understand why we can encounter certain creatures and items only at night. When the
Yeah, so for what it's worth, like Hayata obviously sees a distant light, but that is also a seeming byproduct of having eaten others' eyes, which is interesting to consider. Then you have the Thorcerers, as I like to call them, the Thorn Sorcerers, who saw the Blood Star after their eyes were gouged out by thorns, which is pretty damn metal. I wish we knew more about that. And then even Yura talks about having... Or wait, was this cut dialogue? Hold on, let me look in my footage. No, it's definitely in the game.
Wretched worms, leave me be.
He talks about worms within him. So presumably worms within his eyes or his body, or worms could just be a reference to the player. It's a really weird, enigmatic line of dialogue that I think probably had more significance in an earlier draft of the story that they went into a different direction with later.
The orthodox light of the world dims. We start to see things that were suppressed by it. Deathbirds and bell-bearing hunters can enter our world, and when we look up, we can see the night sky, a myriad of lights that are not the sun, a veritable sea of possibilities. Indeed, the ancient astrologers were able to invent sorcery by doing this very thing. By looking up at night and seeing the stars, one astrologer was able to see a glimpse of the primeval current, and according to the founding reign of stars, the glimpse of the primeval current that the astrologer saw became real. This is supposedly the first sorcery ever cast. It doesn't say that the astrologer learned something, but that his vision became real. And with this in mind, we can understand something far deeper about the nature of creation itself.
Chapter 3, in the beginning.
We hear multiple stories about the primordial history of the lands between. And as I've noted before, there is a thematic resonance in the most core aspects of these stories. Hayeda relays to us the words of the three fingers, saying that all things came from the one great, which was divided into many things by the greater will. Count Emir tells us that we began as stardust, born of a great rupture far across the skies. And there are numerous descriptions of the crucible that describe all of life once being blended together. Let us take these storytellers at their word for now, and imagine the creation story that they are jointly telling us. The origin of all life in the lands between is cosmic in nature. There was once a fundamentally unfathomable thing called the One Great, a kind of divine cosmic unity. The relationship between the One Great and the greater will is ambiguous, but we can make a surprising amount of sense of this story by taking the names literally. The greater will could simply be the strongest intention to emerge from this multifaceted entity, a vision of a different way that existence could be, and upon conceiving of this fractured reality, it became so. I use the word vision intentionally, for while the greater will is a fundamentally unfathomable entity, we do get a visual representation of it, in the form of Meteor's microcosm. There's a dark void in the center with a corona of light around it, evocative of a black hole or an eye. Meteor is said to be the...
Well, I don't dislike this idea in general. Just the, nitpicker in me thinks that in order for the eye to function, it needs to receive light. And so this is kind of a different idea of an eye where it's projecting what it sees rather than actually observing anything. So I don't really think that matters too much, but it's just something I figure is worth sharing, perhaps.
first star to fall upon the lands between, and to have once received messages from the greater will through this microcosm. The hole in Ymir's hat is also said to represent the greater will, and a few items describe this being as inhabiting a void. The overlapping imagery of black holes and eyes is intentional, for they are on a deep level similar things, voids into which light falls. This is how the dark moon is depicted in Rani's ending, how the Lord of Frenzied Flame is represented. An eye is something into which light falls, and this gives rise to a vision of the world. While we're discussing vision and cosmic reality, I can't avoid bringing up the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. In the early 20th century, physicists realized that the most accurate way to describe the behavior of the smallest things, such as electrons and photons of light, was by using math that involved indeterminacy. That is, by pretending the particle didn't exist in a single place until it was actually measured and located. The equations were useful, but many scientists, including Einstein and Schrödinger himself, thought of this as a mathematical trick and not a real description of the world. The famous Schrödinger's cat thought experiment, where a cat is said to be both dead and alive at the same time, was originally meant to be absurd, to be evidence against treating this math as a true description of reality. And yet, generations have come and gone, and the Copenhagen interpretation persists. Our best model of the quantum world, underlying reality, suggests that in some sense, things only become fixed in place, only become fully real when they are observed.
And for what it's worth, Einstein did come around. It's not as though he completely opposed quantum mechanics for the remainder of his life.
There is admittedly some poetic license in this way of talking about our own world, but for the purpose of discussing a fantasy world, poetic license should be assumed. So in Elden Ring, Light emanates from the cosmic forces of creation and falls upon the lands between. But it is only when the golden light of the greater will's emanated intent is seen that it becomes fixed and fully real.
So as far as the one great and the greater will are concerned, I think the way that Hayata's lines could be read in Japanese is that the one great and the greater will could just be synonyms, and that she could just be referring to the greater will as something else. So I don't necessarily think that there's a true break off between the one great and the greater will, but I also don't really think it changes too much if the one great is the greater will, because she could just be saying that the greater will made a mistake by essentially dividing itself. I don't really think it changes too much, but I do think a lot of people get really caught up on the interpretation that the one great is and always has been like one undivided force, or an indivisible force is probably a better way to say that, when that might have just been the greater will and not something even greater than the greater will, perhaps.
This is why golden runes are located within the eye. The words of creation are a visual language, transmitted through light, and made manifest when they are seen. When they enter a person, become known to them. But there was more than one vision for how the world could be. There's the golden light of the greater will's emanated intent, and then there's the light of every other star, every other aspect of the one great that was fractured. These stars are invisible by day, when the greater source of light, the sun, prevails. At night, however, one can look up into the sky and see not just one vision for the world, but many. And when you look deeply into the night, enough light may reach you to form a vision that becomes real. For when you stare into the abyss also stares into you.
So Chadwick says that perception is the key here. The more you can enforce your will into others' perception, the more your definition becomes real. I think that's unironically true, especially in a game like Elden Ring. And maybe this is a bit of an unfair point to bring up, but that is kind of like the guiding principle behind faith and miracles and incantations in many of the FromSoft games, that the more firmly you believe something, the more real it becomes. Which it's always been a little bit ironic to me that doesn't produce like a completely positive feedback loop in the games. Like there do seem to be like some observable limits to the powers of faith, I guess. But I don't really know why it doesn't go into that positive feedback loop, to be fair there.
Since we're discussing...
Because bros, if I could think that I had a delicious pizza in front of me, and then one day I had a delicious pizza in front of me, I would keep working the hell out of that reality-bending mind magic there.
Seeing the difference between golden light and starlight, I also feel obligated to comment on one of the most inscrutable dialogues in all of Elden Ring. That being Sorceress Selen's description of glintstone sorcery. She says this:
Our art draws upon the powers embedded in glintstone. But what is the nature of such power? Glintstone is the amber of the cosmos. Golden amber contains the remnants of ancient life and houses its vitality, while glintstone contains residual life and thus the vitality of the stars. It should not be forgotten that glintstone sorcery is the study of the stars and the life therein.
I cannot overstate how confusing this dialogue was the first time I heard it. What's the difference between ancient life and residual life? The Japanese text can help us here, as the distinction is more obviously between the remnants of ancient life and the remnants of star life. In the context of a great rupture in the sky, triggered by the greater will, this...
Even though he says that, I don't functionally know what exactly the difference is supposed to be. Because, I mean, ancient life could be like dragons, but we also have star life being like crystallians or Estelle. But if the Elden Beast or in the Elden Ring were ancient remnants of star life, what do you get there? It's a little bit strange. Maybe he'll come up with a better distinction for it than I have.
starts to make more sense, as the Greater Will sent a specific golden star bearing life towards the lands between, and the other pieces of the One Great became fractured and scattered across the sky to become the stars. We've discussed that light, whether from the sun or stars, is intended to be seen, but notably, starlight that falls and doesn't land in an eye seems to be able to crystallize in Elden Ring, as we can find starlight shards throughout the game. It seems that given enough time,
Eldegusto said star life could be the first primordial life from the Greater Will itself. Well, if that's the case, you'd still need to distinguish between the golden star amber versus glintstone not gold star amber. Maybe golden amber is just ancient, whereas the new stuff is not so ancient. I don't know.
this process of starlight crystallization eventually leads to glintstone, the catalyst for sorcery. The phrase, "the wisdom beyond stone," also starts to make sense if we believe that glintstone is made of starlight, and that starlight contains fragments of the fractured One Great.
Oh no.
Also of note here, the word for glintstone in Japanese translates literally as pyroxene.
If I'm remembering correctly, it's also used for like Titanite. Or maybe not Titanite. Maybe that's the Brightstone Cove Seldora stuff. Either way, it shows up in previous games.
Pyroxene is an extremely common mineral on Earth, but it can also be found in meteorites. In 1996, a particular meteorite made primarily of pyroxene was analyzed by scientists who noticed microscopic patterns that looked like bacterial fossils. At the time, this discovery was heavily covered by the media as possibly the first proof of the existence of alien life. And while further analysis largely disproved the original claim, this meteorite had a lasting impact on popular conceptions of what alien life might look like. This might help to explain the connection between pyroxene, glintstone, and residual life from the stars. In any case, this divide between golden light and starlight, between day and night, inner order and outer gods, began with a decision of the Greater Will to fracture life and give rise to something new. This fractured world is the Greater Will's vision, a term Enya uses to describe the Elden Ring inside of Marika, the vision of the Greater Will. Through the Erd Tree, this light can be cast upon the world and enter the eyes of the many. Outer gods, then, are alternate visions for this world, and
So Elden Enthusiast asks, what if normal glintstone is from dead stars containing residue of what's left, while amber is from live stars and suns? It's interesting. I like that idea. I'm not sure how you would classify like a dead star. We know that Estelle is called a malformed star of ill omen, but to be fair, Estelle itself isn't necessarily glintstone, although it seems to be glintstone adjacent. Crystallians, would we call those dead? Maybe you could say like inorganic. Is there a difference between an inorganic and an organic star in Elden Ring? Maybe. We do have a blood star, so why not? Mothcrab says, in real life, stars are suns, but you have it backwards. Suns are stars, but yeah, it's one of those things where you can't tell if this is like super fantasy magic, and the dichotomy is always weird and hard to dissect. Falling star beasts are rocky, like real life comets and meteors. Well, they are. Wait, are they comets? The falling star beasts. So meteor beasts, essentially, yeah. Oh, yeah, I should probably bring that up. So the character for star in Japanese doesn't necessarily mean star the same way that it does in English. So Hoshi, as you see, means star here, but it's also used for planets, or more specifically, heavenly bodies in general, or satellites. Like Waxay is satellites, star, glyph symbol, shape, asterisk. Oh yeah, the shape. Dot, spot, fleck. 1 star. That determines one's fate, their fortune, etc. So a star in Elden Ring might mean like a literal star, or maybe it just means some kind of heavenly celestial body. Heavenly meant in like the space sense, not like angels. Although who knows?
In order to see them, you must loot.
And then the halo of the sun, welcome on into the stream. You think that the blue star life is outside of the order established by the greater will? Maybe. But at the very least, it seems to have been brought into the order with the Golden Order fundamentalism and Radagon and the Carians and whatnot. What about Chisei or Chisei-ten? I don't know enough about like constellations in both languages to just immediately remember what that is off the top of my head. Like, I know Chisei is a star in Suikoden. Oh, do you mean like intelligence? Wait, no. Is that a specific star? That makes 2 of us? Okay. Ymir seems to think the blue star stuff comes from the greater will. That's true. He does say that we're all stardust. You wonder if the heavenly bodies of Elden Ring depend on more medieval notions of the land's inhabitants? Maybe. Alright, let's go back to the video.
Lose sight of the golden light of grace. This is why interaction with the outer gods is so frequently connected to underground spaces, to night, or to places where the light of the sun doesn't reach. These outer gods must be seen by and take purchase within a person in order to influence this fractured world. But why exactly did the greater will want to fracture the one great in the first place? Why divide the world into its many dualities?
Chapter 4, The Eyes of Many.
In order to discuss the nature of unity and division, and to get at the core of Elden Ring's artistic message, I'm going to bring up an old anime and an even older religion.
Oh no, is this it, Chadwick?
Let's cover the religion first, and you can look forward to me bringing up anime in a minute. The religion in question is Gnosticism, an early branch of Christianity that included ideas that were eventually deemed heretical by the evolving orthodoxy of the Church. These ideas included the fact that creation was fundamentally flawed, as the creation of material reality by an entity called the Demiurge separated us from the spiritual world and from God. Gnostics claim that we exist in a kind of dualistic purgatory, and we should endeavor to escape that reality and reconnect with the lost spiritual reality. These ideas are connected to other early proto-Christian ideas that didn't make the cut into the canonical Bible that most are familiar with today, as well as to esoteric Kabbalah. There is...
All right, so I did learn a lot more about Gnosticism somewhat recently, over the past, I don't even know, however many months. But anyway, always just hearing about the demiurge in a vacuum just didn't really make sense to me in any comparison point to Christianity as I understood it at the time. But now, knowing what I know now, I can hopefully articulate it to make it a little bit clearer for those who didn't know, like myself, earlier. So, hold on. I guess I'll pull up good old Paint again. Where's me text box? Demiurge. I should probably make this a bigger size than 10. Should probably make this a bigger size than 10. So let's say you get the Demiurge. And people are tempted to call that God, but this is kind of more meant in the sense of Yahweh of the Old Testament. And Sophia literally means like knowledge or wisdom, like philosophies, like love of knowledge. Sophia means like God with like a capital G, the one that's above the Demiurge. And so like the Demiurge is a bit of a mistake and is lesser than like the big form of God. And Sophia can't come down into the physical realm where we are. Uh-oh. Because it's above it, essentially. And the reason why this becomes a more Christian thing is that essentially Jesus leads one to the path of Sophia and is kind of like a reimagining of the Demiurge in a way. Well, not really. It's like trying to amend for the Demiurge's actions. Oh, it has to go that way. Anyway. Because Sophia is trying to use Jesus to kind of rectify what went wrong with the Demiurge, so that way man can make it back up to the higher realm of knowledge with Sophia. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. Elohim is just another moniker for God. So that's just Old Hebrew, and the like basic Judaism doesn't really conform to Gnosticism from what I understand. Elden, you had to change your script to make things more clear hierarchy-wise? Yeah. Hey, Salamonkey. Yes, we are talking Gnosticism right now. So, yeah. Once I was able to conceptualize the Demiurge as being more equivalent to Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, and because of that understanding, that could explain why Yahweh seems kind of vindictive and doesn't really seem to match on to Jesus very well. That kind of made things a little bit easier for me to understand. So hopefully that helps you guys out as well. I'm not going to try to say those names. So, okay. Unless you guys have some other comments, I'm just going to go back ahead with the video. And of course, this is like a very crude breakdown, and there's probably a lot more nuance to this to talk about. So just take all of that with a heavy grain of salt.
This is going to be a test on these terms, by the way, so I hope you're writing this all down. It's not hard to find the parallel between Gnosticism and the creation narrative of Elden Ring, and specifically with the claim of the three fingers, that the greater will made a mistake, and that the active separation of mortal life from the divine is the source of all human suffering. The three fingers and frenzied flame seek to reunite the physical and spiritual worlds in brutal fashion. In this context, consider Hayeda's questline, where you need to offer her literal human eyes in order to help her find her way to the truth of the frenzied flame.
Oop.
It is individual perception, leading to individual identity, that reinforces the fractured state of the world. Whereas by combining the perspectives of many people together, which Hayeda does by literally eating their eyes, she can see the path towards the great unified origin of all things. So, is the frenzied flame correct? Is individuation the source of all suffering? Would we be better off if we all melted back together? In order to answer that question, it's time to talk about a specific anime from the late 90s that I know for a fact Miyazaki was heavily influenced by.
Guys, I was right. GUT Guts Berserk.
No, not Berserk.
Damn it.
Everyone knows about that one already.
All right, so my guesses are potentially... Hold on. let's not go with knee-jerk reactions. So, I definitely know that he knows a record of Lodos War, which I don't think maps onto this super well. We have Chadwick's favorite, Hokuto no Ken, Fist of the North Star. What's another good one? What were we just talking about? Oh, yeah. Breaking people down into one thing. Ava? It's Ava, isn't it?
I'm talking about Neon Genesis
Got it!
Evangelion.
Ooh, baby, yeah. So I've thought about making a potential lore video comparing Ava to the Dark Souls / crap at this point, like most Eastern games have like this kind of thing. We even actually had some of my thoughts pop up in Kazan, which is just, it shows that it's extended even beyond like just the Japan. It seems to be more rooted in like Eastern traditions in general. Let me pull up that screenshot. Do I have it labeled? Dang it, I don't have it labeled. I'll find it eventually. I swear I will. Oh no. Dang it, I had it. Oh wait, no, it's probably in here, isn't it? Nope, not there. So it's from Legend of Mana. They talk about how dolls get possessed by souls because they're the spirits of the dead that didn't want to pass on properly because they had too much enmity in their hearts, too many grudges. Fudge. This is definitely before Shadow of the Erdtree came out. Alright, I can't find it. I might just need to give up. It's unfortunate. The funny thing is, I saw it the other day when I was looking up something for the stream. Rip. Alright, I'm just going to move on. Getting the robot LP? Thanks. It's on the Discord? Oh, you're right. I did put that in there, didn't I? Wait, I actually need to be in my server. Aha! Thanks, Elden. I totally forgot that I posted that there. So we have a doll in the Legend of Mana, which tells the main character, those who die with desire in their hearts are doomed to wander the earth forever. And so it's a very Buddhist thing that in order to attain nirvana and to escape the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, you just need to let go of desire and not have grudges to keep you trapped in the afterlife and fixated on the physical world. All right, so very excited that I managed to think of Ava on the spot.
Now, as promised, I'm going to endeavor not to spoil Evangelion.
Oh, God. What is he trying to promise? What is this?
The implication I've made just by bringing it up in this chapter. I am going to talk about its themes, however. And if you want to be very careful to avoid spoilers for the original animated series, you can skip ahead to whatever timestamp I'm putting on screen right now. Okay, so it's hard to overstate the impact that Evangelion had on 90s anime, and frankly on the nature of anime and video game storytelling since then. The inclusion of esoteric religious symbology and the opaque nature of the narrative were incredibly novel at the time, but have become commonplace in the decades since. I feel like Akira and Evangelion gave a 1-2 punch to the Japanese psyche that compelled future generations to tell convoluted stories.
So this is probably my favorite Evangelion-related meme image that I've ever seen. It's just some girl on a talk show that said, "I was so obsessed with Eva that I read the entire Bible." Man, that's just so funny to me because if you're familiar with the Bible, then you know Ava essentially has nothing to do with it whatsoever. And so somebody being tricked into reading the Bible because Evangelion is just... I don't know. There's just something so hilarious about that to me.
And our friend Hidetaka Miyazaki is no exception. In any case, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that the underlying thesis of Evangelion is this. Because people are separate individuals, we can never truly understand each other. The divide between two human souls is the greatest barrier in existence, and therefore we inevitably hurt each other. Nonetheless, we shouldn't try to change that fact, because it is within that struggle to reach across the divide and connect to others that we create meaning. Or to put it another way,
However ruined this world has become, however mired in torment and despair, life endures. Births continue. There is beauty in that, is there not?
now I want to show a single out-of-context scene from Evangelion in order to solidify the relationship between perspective, division, and creation. All you need to know is that the main character is experiencing a moment of unprecedented freedom from the constraints of the world. Voices tell the character that in this space, he can do or be anything, and yet he expresses anxiety and disorientation. In order to orient him, a voice offers to give him a restriction by drawing a horizon line. This literally grounds our character. It gives him a ground to stand on, and it makes our character one step more comfortable, but requires him to sacrifice a single degree of his freedom.
So for what it's worth, I think that the story of Evangelion is inspired probably by Eastern religion, and more specifically Hinduism, and the concept of the god of Vishnu, where Vishnu is essentially like the creator god of the universe. Like pretty much all of the universe is a byproduct of the consciousness of the dream that Vishnu is dreaming, and that whenever he wakes up, the universe will come into an end. But it's all just a cycle, because he'll go back to sleep again and the universe will begin in a new form. So basically everything is of Vishnu. And I might have some of the cosmology wrong a little bit, but basically if all that exists is Vishnu, how could there ever be separations or borders or things of that kind? It's because Vishnu wills it to be so, because by dreaming, he's no longer himself. He gives himself company and gives himself like limits. And so I think this is kind of related to what Shinji experiences during the Human Instrumentality Project. Once you get rid of all barriers, what you have left, yourself, well, it becomes a little bit lonely, and he does feel that kind of anxiety. So he starts giving himself constraints to help make sense of himself and himself in relation to what he is not. And then that will become a really big point that he builds off of later on. So
This is the most pure expression of creation through division that I can imagine. For by drawing a horizon line, the distinct concepts of up and down come into being. This same logic applies to personal identity as well, for it is the space between us as individuals that makes identity meaningful. Also, the sound effect when Shinji walks is legendary. Meta-narratively, it's even more fitting that the act of creation is to draw a line,
I'm disappointed he didn't have the sound effect.
which in the context of animation refers back to the creators, whose entire medium for communicating to the audience is predicated upon drawing lines that form boundaries around people, places, and objects. As artists, they create by dividing.
He might be worried about getting demonetized or something like that. We ran out of money, have an existential nightmare instead. True and real. Chapter 5. See the change you want to be.
So with this in mind, consider again the One Great. It's true that we cannot possibly understand the true nature of a being like the Greater Will, or an outer god.
And so, like what I was saying with Shinji and Vishnu, that's kind of how I perceive the Greater Will as it pertains to the One Great. Because even if it all does come back down to one thing, the reason why it probably broke apart is so that way it could understand itself in relation to what isn't itself. And in order to do that, you need to create barriers and divides. And in so doing that, you become divisible, you become dual, and you introduce other disparities between what you think of as yourself versus what you're not. So I digress.
But it is equally true that they cannot fathom being us. Before creation, the One Great may have been a unified divinity, but without an other to contrast itself with, it had no real identity and no means of understanding itself. For all of its perfection, what it lacked was perspective. And so, it contemplated itself the only way it could, by breaking itself into pieces that can refer to each other, that can experience the pull between meanings, and gain individual perspectives. This interplay of perspectives, of competing visions, is what actually creates reality. This is why outer gods can only influence the world through individuals, for they require the active perspective of a living being to make themselves fully real within the lands between. In fact, the nature of outer gods changes with the way they are perceived. Consider, for instance, the remembrance of Romina, which says, after the church was burned to the ground, Romina discovered a twisted divine element, which she weaved into the baleful scarlet rot. Now, I'm aware of a translation question here, which I will discuss in the next chapter. But for now, consider that we know rot is more than a force of destruction. It can also be a source of protection, as hinted by the fermented items and the material verdigris. Rot is an aspect of the natural world, but in the shadows of the flames, Romina found a twisted version of that divinity, implying that the destructive form of the scarlet rot we see in the lands between is not the only version of the rot that could manifest in the world. The natural form of rot, however, is suppressed by the Golden Order, which seeks to keep things eternally unchanging. Similarly, the Outer God Heirloom says that a clan lost...
I would kind of disagree with that, and maybe he just didn't phrase it the way that he would have liked here, because I don't think that rot is suppressed by the Golden Order. I think it flourishes as a byproduct of the Golden Order, and that once Destined Death was part of the world, it would have kept rot in check because things could have died natural deaths, and then once something is fully decayed, it can't continue to decay anymore, so the scarlet rot would go with it, because scarlet rot itself is kind of a subject to decaying. It's naturally if Destined Death was in the world, but you can't decay that which is already decaying, or can you? Apparently not.
Pressed by the Golden Order, which seeks to keep things eternally unchanging. Similarly, the Outer God Heirloom says that a clan lost everything in a great fire and saw, in the shadow of their ancestor, a twisted deity. We have the same elements present: a fire, a thing that is normally sacred, and a twisted version of that divinity, seen in the shadows. Notably, the flame itself is a heterodox source of light, allowing one to see the world in a different way. The divinity this item refers to is the Formless Mother, or the Mother of Truth. We said before that this outer god is associated with flowing blood, but now consider that she was found by a clan looking upon the corpse of an ancestor. Consider that she is explicitly called a mother, and consider the altar to the formless mother upon which we find Miquella's cocoon. It is sitting upon a great pelvic bone, and when the great hand falls, blood begins to flow down from the center of this pelvis. The formless mother's domain is birth. This also tells us why she is called the Mother of Truth, for it is through birth that individuals...
You know, it's kind of weird now that I think about it. Why Moog and not Morgott? Does Morgott being Grace interfere with that stuff? Obviously, Morgott kind of loses his horns after he gets killed, so shouldn't Moog lose his horns when he gets killed? But Radog still has horns on his body. Radog means Radon plus Moog, by the way. I just thought of that myself. You're welcome. So anyway, moving on. And Mal, welcome back into the stream.
Individual perspectives are created, and it is through individual perspective that truth is born. Yet, traditional birth is another aspect of nature that is suppressed by the Golden Order. We can find the rune of the unborn, separated from the Elden Ring, and locked inside Renala's amber egg. Thus, blood does not flow as it once did, and it is now only the twisted, destructive version of the Formless Mother.
To be fair, the rune of the unborn might not just mean like the rune of birth. It could just be the rune of rebirth. So that might have been a thing. Not that we would really even know about that or what it even entails. We do know that seemingly rebirth and or reincarnation is shunned by the Golden Order, perhaps, or maybe it used to be, but is not any longer. At the very least, Muriel says it's a taboo type thing, so I don't think we have too much reason to doubt it further.
That can be seen by those who are oppressed and desperate to find divinity. This theme of finding divinity through experience of the world reoccurs repeatedly throughout Shadow of the Erdtree. The best example is one that seems strange and unimportant at first: Red Bear. This is a man who fought a massive, terrifying bear and became fascinated by it. This led him to develop his own divine incantation called Roar of Regalia, which says, "Only through desperate battle with the feral wild can one discover a god unique to oneself." The description also says that this spell is jokingly referred to as bear communion, implying that it is a kind of incantation that is mocked. And yet, it works. Red Bear succeeded in discovering a god unique to himself. This tells us that in Elden Ring, divine truth is not a static thing to be preached about, but something to be found through direct experience, much like our experience of the game world itself.
That nerd ran out of mana.
Indeed, there is a clear connection between the theme of creation emerging through competing perspectives and the artistic process behind the game. I have already alluded to the fact that the two fingers being conversant in an inscrutable language of creation is a meta-narrative allegory for the creators behind the game, who created the world of Elden Ring through the complex motion of their fingers. And there's an even deeper level to this meta-narrative interpretation that we have available to us now, because Elden Ring doesn't have a canonical truth explicitly handed down to the players. Rather, the truth of the game is discovered by those of us who play the game, struggling in desperate battle with the feral wild and searching for divine elements in the shadows. So for the final section of this philosophical tirade,
That's right, guys. He's saying that your headcanon is the truth that we discovered along the way.
I want to delve a little deeper into the creative process behind the game. There was a commenter on my first video who loved the meta-narrative connection between fingers and the developers, and said, following that logic, the Greater Will could meta-narratively be the developers, and the reason no one can contact the Greater Will anymore is because the game is done development. I thought this comment was very funny, but what if we take it very seriously? With a couple of caveats, we will find a deep artistic truth behind the game, and the true identity of the greater will.
Miyazaki is dead, and we have killed him. Chapter 6, Lost and Found in Translation.
One unavoidable issue when analyzing a game like Elden Ring is that while I'm speaking to you in English, the game was created by a Japanese team. As much as I may try to bring up Shinto or Buddhist ideas to provide context, there is a barrier between our experience of the game as an English-speaking audience and the experience of a Japanese audience. And this brings us to the topic of mistranslation.
And then as we get to the fun point, we get to add Germ into the mix with saying, hey guys, we have an English author who provided the lore and all of the descriptions and everything and all of the dialogue to the game. And then did that get translated into Japanese? And then did we get the telephone version of that translated back into English for us? Maybe. Although, to be fair, within like the plethora of interviews that Germ has done and the ones with Miyazaki, it's pretty clear that he gave like what seems to be more outline materials of like character and plot points rather than fully fleshed out things that we might expect. So I am very curious to see or to learn about like what George R. R. Martin may have influenced in the game, what Miyazaki and FromSoft developers repurposed for their own needs in crafting a video game, and what all got changed throughout development. Because as much fun as it is to kind of joke that everything was written by George, we could pretty clearly see that that must not have really been the case because of just how much is differed from the cut content that didn't make it into 1.0 versus what we even get now with Mikola and the Shadow of the Erd Tree stuff. Because if you look at the stuff that was even in the internal files in the first game, you had like Mikola's ending about like abundance and decay, and there's like no depictions of that really anywhere. People thought that the Euphoria weapon was supposed to be related to Mikola, but now if it ever was, it exists in a completely different context. So long story short, this game is like an onion. There are layers to it.
I brought up Mirko as a reference, and their translation notes on Shadow of the Erd Tree are detailed and insightful. They give us alternate possible translations for several key item descriptions. But there is an assumption underlying this analysis that warrants further scrutiny. Mirko says, the working method used for these translations does not favor the translators, as they often receive lines of text without any context of when and how they would be used. This is true of video game translation in general, but there is a caveat for us to make, specifically with the English language as used in Elden Ring. For English has been part of the creative process for the game since its inception. It's no secret that George R. R. Martin was involved with writing the story for Elden Ring, and from various interviews, we can know exactly what his contribution looked like. Martin
Oh no, it is canon that it is a sequel to Dark Souls, isn't it? Because that's what George said.
says that his job was to create a world-building document, to outline the history and mythos of the Lands Between, prior to the actual events of the game itself. After several exchanges, Martin had a complete document, a text, that he handed over to the Japanese team, which they used as the starting point and inspiration for building an entire virtual world and writing the plot and dialogue that we experience as players. Martin's role was finished at this point, and for the Shadow of the Erd Tree DLC, Miyazaki made it clear that the team was able to meaningfully refer to the original document for inspiration, but that Martin did not contribute any new text. What this means is that in a meaningful way, the creative process for Elden Ring began in English. And we know that Miyazaki was very concerned with the translation into English because all of the spoken dialogue in the game was to be recorded in English, even for the Japanese audience. This may seem very odd, that a Japanese game written primarily by a Japanese team would be voice acted in English. and expect its Japanese players to read subtitles in order to understand what was being said. However, this has been true of most of From's projects for over a decade, and Miyazaki has said that part of his inspiration for the entire Souls series was to recreate the experience he had as a child of reading Western fantasy novels translated into Japanese, and feeling lost in the mystery of foreign words and concepts.
Yeah, my TLDR for this is that it's really just vibes based, and it might just feel a little bit out of place for a Japanese audience to see like a very obviously Western inspired game and have it just be voiced in native Japanese. If anybody in chat can remind me, did Naughty Dog have Japanese be the default audio for Ghost of Tsushima, or was it English? So either way, my point is that it's not like unheard of for development studios to like have those types of accommodations to fit the setting.
In other words, mistranslation isn't an unfortunate side effect of developer limitations. It is an intentional and important part of the experience.
That is like one of the most frustrating phrasings I've ever seen in a lore video so far. Like, that's just so incredibly disappointing.
The creators want ideas to get lost in translation, back and forth between English and Japanese, to create this organic sense that no one person or language can hold all the pieces of the puzzle. That viewing the same thing through a different lens allows you to see something new, just as one can find a new divinity by looking into the shadow of something sacred.
On one hand, I think that there probably is a point to that Miyazaki doesn't want to trample on anybody else's headcanon, which is why he leaves things so cryptic and ambiguous, even in response to questions in interviews. But conversely, he's also given somewhat direct answers to questions in interviews. Like, that's how we learned how the moon presence is called pale blood, at least for the English-speaking audience, because that sure as hell wasn't clear in the English text of the game. And I honestly just don't think they're even aware of a lot of these issues. And even if they were, they probably don't care enough to take the time to update a lot of text, because it's not like it's going to get them substantially more money if they did so. And it's just all a process, essentially.
This may be different for the Italian or German translations of the game, but in the case of the English text, there is reason to consider it as integral to understand.
That's such a wild, bonkers argument to me. Like, there's a difference between the German and Italian, but not so much for the English and Japanese. Like, to me, it's either you're all for the intentional mistranslations or you're not. Like, I feel like this is a bit of having your cake and eating it too. In other words, Miyazaki's anathema to me? Exactly. Why do you think I said Miyazaki is dead and we've killed him?
Understanding the lore as the Japanese text is. Even in Japanese, there is intentional ambiguity worked into the language. Take, for example, my prior note, credited to Mirko, that the word for shaman could be read as itako, a blind spirit medium. Well, here is the most typical way to write itako in Japanese. And here is the typical way to write Miko. The actual compound kanji used in Elden Ring is a mix of these, so it's not immediately obvious which way it should be read, though it is clear that the word being conveyed is somewhere in that realm. Elden Ring is a story that is fundamentally about perspective, and the impossibility of perfectly understanding another person's soul. Linguistic and symbolic ambiguity are central to the game's artistic vision. And with that in mind, let us consider one more time the meta-narrative allegory we began this series with. The two fingers speak a kind of visual language that we struggle to understand, but they are said to be conveying the intent of the greater will. At the end of Shadow of the Erdtree, however, we get a massive revelation, that the mother of all two fingers, Metyr, hasn't actually received any messages from the greater will in eons. In the context of the translation issues we just mentioned, it becomes clear that in our meta-narrative allegory, Miyazaki is not the greater will. No, Miyazaki is just weird enough to cast himself in the role of the eldritch creature called Metyr. Think about it. Metyr was the first being to reach the lands between, tasked with the role of creating a world. She receives messages bearing the intended vision of the greater will from an item called the microcosm.
That's right, guys. Silent Ellipsis here just called all of you guys finger bugs. Finger creepers, that's the word.
She interprets these messages and then sets about relaying this vision to each of the fingers that she creates, delegating to them the task of inscribing the language of creation into the world. But shortly after they begin, messages from the greater will cease. Metyr is left alone
Earth
to
be
interpret the
Miyazaki.
intent of the creator imperfectly, and imperfections proliferate from her to the fingers, to Marika, and to the entire world. The greater will is George R.R. Martin. The microcosm is the world-building document Martin wrote in English as the initial vision for the land.
So honestly, I think this is taking a little bit too much liberties with what we don't really have access to in terms of the information of the game. Because Miyazaki said that he wanted to make a game and he wanted some world building to go with it. So he presumably already had some concepts for what would go on to become Elden Ring that just was not very fleshed out. And I'm trying to remember which one interview, I think it was the Overture of Elden Ring that talks about the inception of what would go on to become the Erd Tree. They wanted to have some kind of like thing to look at in the sky and like break up the skyboxes essentially and give players a sense of direction and like where they could go. And that's kind of what would go on to become the Erd Tree. And they might have started off with just that idea, but not had it like be called the Erd Tree. It might not have been golden. And so they were probably going to Miyazaki, to Martin for some justifications to kind of have like a world tree in the game. So, like, for all I know, Silent Ellipsis could be right here, and then it really was all George R. R. Martin, and he really is the greater will, but I think there isn't enough information for me to be comfortable having a concrete stance one way or the other, so all I can do is just shout my skepticism from the rooftops, as always. I'm always diminishing George's work on it. Well, how much coding did that guy do? But like I was just saying earlier, Mao, like, there's been so many changes from the story that it's very clear that it wasn't like concrete and set in stone, and that they're actually following George's vision to a T. And we even have the interview with Miyazaki saying that he would like to have the depiction of some of the demigods even surprise George R. R. Martin, because they're creating a post-apocalyptic world based off of the quote-unquote greater will vision that George was first establishing.
Between, which then had to be interpreted by a development team that didn't natively speak his language, and then turned into an entire world. This artistic vision was fractured, changed, and then relayed to hundreds of developers, who each had to filter the vision.
Oh no, George being the greater will makes perfect sense because of how long it takes for stories to get transmitted by him.
Through their own understanding. This fractured world was then offered in turn to millions of players, who each had to struggle individually to find meaning within the game, and over the course of years to recombine their understanding into a shared vision of what Elden Ring is. And we find within the game factions and outer gods that can validate and reinforce our many understandings of the game. If we believe that this game is about deciphering the inscrutable intent of the creators to find a harmonious truth, we can follow the path of the Noble Gold Mask. If we think that the game is really about player versus player combat, then we can join the ranks of the Bloody Fingers. And if we think that a search for meaning is futile, then we can melt it all away in the searing flames of chaos. This allegory is about more than Elden Ring. This story is about the process of artistic creation and the process of understanding. For we live in a world where our practical needs and the weight of identity drive us to find shortcuts for truth. We become accustomed to perceiving ourselves and others in a particular light, and accepting the world we see as the way things are. But in order to learn something new about ourselves, we must gain new perspective. And we do that by breaking bits and pieces of ourselves off and building them back together into something new. Then we observe it to see what those pieces say to us about the inscrutable whole. And however strange and imperfect those pieces are, when light passes through them and shows us something new, there is beauty in that.
Postlude.
So, even with extensive editing, this turned into a long episode. But I really do see this as the climax of the Grand Unified Theory. These 4 episodes contain the core concepts I wanted to convey when I began. And believe it or not, many of the ideas I have discussed occurred to me on a single day, at least in their mushy, inarticulate initial form. It was October 16th, actually, and I genuinely felt like I was staring into the primeval current. I went to a social dance that night, and I remember mentioning that I was cooking up a grand unified theory of Elden Ring to my dance partner. Her response was, "Oh yeah, I don't care."
Got him.
I'm glad that there are so many of you that do. So this episode is the point I was hoping to reach when I began this channel. That doesn't mean that I'm done with Elden Ring. I've had a lot of new ideas since beginning this channel. But it does mean that I'm going to take my time to digest before labeling anything new as part of the Grand Unified Theory. I do want that label to mean something specific. In the meantime, I will be fleshing out my Elden Ring lore theories in future Between Meanings episodes, and I may start to branch out as well, and go into analysis of other games or media beyond Elden Ring. I have some ideas in mind, but if you have any particular requests for topics, do let me know in the comments. And needless to say, the experience of becoming a YouTube creator has surpassed my expectations. Scratch that. I do need to say that your participation and engagement as viewers has transformed this project and made it more meaningful. Even if I didn't have time to respond or shout you out in a video, I have read every comment I've received to date, and they've all influenced this project as it evolved and the ideas solidified. So thank you. And once again, make sure to let the algorithm know that this is some engaging content. Till next time.
Okay, so as far as a grand unified theory goes, cosmology and vision harkening back to Miyazaki and George R. R. Martin, I don't know. On one hand, I feel like that's a little bit of a nothing burger, but honestly, I feel like that part of the video could more or less be cut. And if he was just focusing more on the aspect of the greater will leading to division and perception as a byproduct of that and creating meaning from individual perceptions, that part would probably be fine as the grand unified theory of Elden Ring. I think the video could have been improved by repeating that in a bit of a thesis statement conclusion, as opposed to just having a postlude. So you really need to pay attention to keep track of what his actual message is. That isn't necessarily a bad thing. I myself hate writing thesis statements, but over time I've grown to understand how they can be useful tools. I just feel like, at least for myself, the way that I was initially taught thesis statements was just kind of garbage, and it felt like essentially the Buddhist path of confusing the finger pointing to the moon for the moon itself. So anyway, I do like the video, except for all of the part about the translations, because I hate it. It makes me angry. I'm sure you guys have no idea why. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and share the video with you guys in chat if you want to give Silent Ellipsis some support. This video came out only a week ago, so yeah. Whoops, didn't mean to hit the mic. Elden, you have no choice but to write theses, as I know full well. So, like, there are ways to do it. It just depends. Like, if you have like a more academic background, it's very easy to fall into the thesis trap. I've gathered the way that you're writing the term theses right now is a little bit different than just like a thesis statement. But anyway, moving beyond that, I honestly think that, have I shared this opinion before in chat? I probably have at some point, but I honestly think in many ways that academia, at least for the humanities, is probably going to fall to the wayside, and instead universities should probably start focusing more on bridging content gaps in terms of introducing academia or incorporating academia into content creation or vice versa, because this is really going to be the arbiter of public thought and opinion, and it's really going to be what pushes a lot of meta narratives about certain thoughts and beliefs that people have. And why do I go off on that tangent, which seemingly has no connection with what I was talking about before? It's because the current style of writing in academia isn't really conducive to onboarding people who may not be intimately familiar with certain subjects. And granted, it isn't always within academia's interest to onboard people who aren't already at a certain, I don't want to say skill floor, like knowledge floor to engage with the content. But if academia doesn't catch up with the times, I feel like they're going to eventually have more people control the discourse around many subjects that probably have no business doing so otherwise. And anyway, like, academics or failed academics or people who've left academia tend to make some of the most thought-provoking content. And I feel like when you get into the humanities, after a while, degrees just become more formalities, which is why anybody can become a content creator, which is, I think, a good thing in the grand scheme of things, but it also has a lot of downsides. So Halo, as a PhD in CS, as in computer science, you think I'm right? Humanities academia is too resistant to new media and ideas. It seems to be quite the opposite for hard sciences. Yeah, well, going for like the PhD, it's a really different thing working with hard sciences versus the humanities. So I would definitely agree, like, STEM stuff kind of needs academia. Although, with that being said, I imagine that the access to it could be broadened significantly with content creation like this as well. Mothcrab, you're going to live stream yourself breaking and entering the files at FromSoft to get the annals of history that the Nameless King lost? Okay. Good luck with that. El Gusto said lawyers are not adapting well to social media and learning modern networking in school. The youngsters teach the old. Well, not only that, like, we are entering a brand new world in terms of the way that language learning models can interact with things like laws, because you used to need paralegals to do so much damn research on laws. Like, once they actually finally get digitized, that's really going to change. Sorry, let me rephrase this. Like, once all of the old court rulings and stuff get digitized and added into like these digital repositories, language learning models are going to be able to do the work that paralegals would spend months doing in the past within seconds, if even that long. So we're living in very, very interesting times, and I hate it. Stella says, don't admit to planning crimes, even fake crimes. It's good practice to not do that. As we always say, if you're going to do a crime, only do one of them. Don't make us co-conspirators. Elda said we have paralegals and lawyers getting caught using AI to format basic stuff and having errors. I mean, do you blame them? It's just always the case that people are going to take the path of least resistance, even if it has drawbacks. So how did I get back to this? I was complaining about thesis statements, but I did want to comment more on the video itself. So yeah, reading back between the lines and going back to the thoughts that he was presenting in everything else. Elden Ring is about seeing others and recognizing them. I could see where he's coming from with that, but counterpoint, the best ending of the game, the Frenzied Flame ending, says, nah, I'd win. And then gets rid of existence. Elden, you can't trust ChatGPT to find you proper sources. You've tried. Oh yeah, I'm definitely not a proponent of using ChatGPT, AI, or language learning models for pretty much anything, to be honest. So don't take that from me. I'm just saying what people are doing, even if it is a little bit folly what they are doing. Because you could even use ChatGPT to, come up with the perfect ratios to levy tariffs against other countries, right? Halo, you worked for LLMs when they came out in 2020. Sorry for all the trouble they've caused. Oh, man. It's you. Hey, guys, get your pitchforks. Get them. I don't blame the engineers. I blame marketing and the engineers. Like, I mean, you're going to do what you're told, but it's just like, how come nobody can just stop and chill for a second and think things through whenever they come up with a product? Like, it is beyond infuriating to me how Google automatically incorporates AI results for things. So let's think of something random to look up. How many times does twin appear in Elden Ring? Because that was the first question of the video. Hey, we didn't get an AI thing for once. Damn it. My example maybe is too specific. But anyway, like it's so frustrating that you get random AI generated slop. Or if you tried, like, if we look up Val Kilmer, I wouldn't be surprised if we get AI results for images right now. Maybe not. But there's definitely been cases where I've been trying to find actors and there's just been random AI stuff. I'm like, why is this a thing? It's so frustrating. Like, I wish I could take a setting to say, don't show me anything AI in the system without typing in before year 2022 or whatnot. What do I think was the role of the fingers in the history of the lands between? And what about the Erd Tree beyond America's Golden Order? I wish I knew more, to be honest, because it's so frustrating not knowing whether or not the two fingers themselves ever actually did truly have contact with the greater will, and then if the greater will bypassed matter to commune with them temporarily, or if they were all just acting as middlemen and playing both sides so that they always came out on top. I think that's a very strong possibility. I've always been very suspicious of the way that trusting of the two fingers comes down to source. Trust me, bro. Like, there's no falsification of the things they claim unless you say, like, the runes themselves can be falsified if you're Gold Mask and can read runes directly or something like that. I don't know. And if anything, that was actually on topic than me more so than me complaining about AI. Hey, John Paul Cochran, I like that. The greatest irony of the human race is being basically the only species to be able to conceive of probabilities and still not thinking through consequences. I don't think that's true, though. I think we have been shown that within crows and other types of birds that they can understand the concept of probabilities and like a simplistic level. and work with that to get like more food dispensed from like Gamba based food dispensers, I guess. I don't know the specifics. Chadwick says, as an illustrator and something of a heartfelt philosoph, nothing is more upsetting than leaving creativity to AI. There's a really good tweet that got screen capped and shared around a lot that's like a girl complaining that I wanted robots to, what was it? To do my laundry, to do my dishes and laundry and not write like my poems and songs and poems and stuff like that. And here we are. The AI is writing the songs and poems and doing all the art, and I am stuck doing the laundry and dishes. Oof, I feel that one. Whew. So anyway, I did enjoy the video up until this section. I am still tempted to potentially make an Ava video at some point, but it all requires time and articulating thoughts and then editing down those thoughts and then getting footage and all that stuff. It's just a very energy involved endeavor creating content. I'm quite impressed at how much content Silent Ellipsis has made within the span of 4 months, because it's really rough when you're making a video this long, and he actually had some pretty good cinematography there and a lot of editing that went into it. So wait, he made this in 4 days? I mean, obviously he probably front loaded some of the work, but still, this is kind of crazy output, especially for a brand new content creator. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed the video, I would definitely recommend subscribing to his channel, because it looks like he's pumping out the stuff. And with that being said, I'm not going to be pumping out stuff. I mean, I'm working on it a little bit. I'm just trying to figure out what direction I want to go with certain projects. But anyway, that'll be it for tonight's stream. I'll try to figure out what I want to watch tomorrow, as always, and then hopefully I'll catch you on the next one, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until then, take care, stay safe. Last Protagonist out.